Good morning. I'm happy to welcome you to this workshop on the security of the Internet's Border Gateway Protocol, or BGP as we know it, hosted by the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Today we have a unique opportunity for diverse stakeholders to engage with one another on strategies to mitigate the risk that unsecured BGP routing presents to the public. First, a quick recap. Last year, the Commission issued a notice of inquiry seeking comment on the security risks posed by BGP's vulnerabilities. Specifically, the FCC sought comment on how to identify and quantify these security incidents, industry's present and future implementation of BGP security measures, the costs of implementing BGP security measures, and the Commission's role in mitigating routing vulnerabilities. We received a robust response from a wide range of stakeholders, including universities, nonprofit associations, federal agencies, ISPs, and other network operators, as well as individuals. There is much agreement that BGP security can be improved by network operators through the widespread implementation of recommended and best practices, including BGP monitoring and event detection, BGP information coordination, path filtering, cryptographic route origin, validation and authentication, and preventing IP spoofing. But to be successful in addressing the BGP security challenge, however, we need to be moving forward together. Some of these security measures, such as cryptographic methods of route origin, authentication, and validation, what you'll hear today called ROA and ROV, using the Resource Public Key Infrastructure, or RPKI, become more effective the more network operators implement them. So there is truly security in numbers in this case. From today's dialogue, we hope to better understand the obstacles to improving BGP security, the steps being taken to overcome them, and importantly, what can and should be done to accelerate progress in both the near term and beyond. With that, I'm pleased with everyone who chose to be in person with us and could be with us today. Thank you all for being here, as well as those who are remotely or listening in. With that, please allow me to introduce Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel of the FCC. Madam.
Thank you so much to our fearless Bureau Chief, Deb Jordan from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau here at the FCC. And good morning to all of you. You chose to be here on a hot July morning with enthusiasm to talk about BGP, and I'm really grateful for it, because it may not be a common household term, but for those of you in this room and online, you know, few technologies are more central to the internet. BGP manages how packets of data get transmitted between networks, and it's central to the internet's global routing system. After all, it's the protocol that allows independently managed networks on the internet to send traffic to one another. Whether or not you've heard of it, we all rely on it every day, every one of us. That's true if you're running a small business, banking online, having a telemedicine appointment, helping the kids with their digital age schoolwork, staying in touch with family, or keeping up to date on the news. BGP is in the background, helping connect our critical infrastructure, supporting emergency services, and keeping the financial sector up and running, and helping with manufacturing. That's a lot. So you might be surprised, as I was, to learn that something that is so critical in the modern economy actually has some pretty humble origins. This history is why BGP is sometimes called the three-napkin protocol. As the story goes, back in 1989, when the internet was just a novelty for computer scientists, it was growing and it was expanding. But the internet's basic protocols couldn't easily handle this growth. So on a lunch break from an IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force meeting that was held in Austin, Texas, two engineers sketched out ideas for the BGP protocol on three, as the story goes, ketchup-stained napkins. What was meant to be a short-term solution developed on the sidelines of an IETF meeting, well, it's still here with us today. And while BGP has allowed network operators to grow and evolve the modern internet, it wasn't designed with security in mind. And I think it's time to address that, because it's vital to our nation's economy that communication over the internet is secure. That statement is so simple and so important. But BGP's initial design, which remains widely deployed today, does not include explicit security features to ensure trust in exchanged information. As a result, adversaries can deliberately falsify BGP reachability information and redirect traffic. In fact, we know state-level actors have been suspected over years of exploiting BGP's vulnerability with hijacking. And these BGP hijacks can expose personal information, enable theft, extortion, facilitate state-level espionage, and disrupt critical security transactions. So again, this needs attention. And there have been efforts to help mitigate BGP security risks since its original design, but I think more work needs to be done, and you all here today are evidence of that. And we're going to need to work together to develop and implement industry standards and best practices that support BGP security. And to move forward, we're going to need a broad range of stakeholders at the table, and what do you know? It looks like you are all here today. Again, we're grateful for that, because the broad representation in this forum, including from our federal partners at the Office of National Cyber Director, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Justice, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, as well as CISA. We got a lot of us here today, and I hope you take note of that partnership, because we all want to work together and work together with you. Because we're going to need a common understanding of what current activities are underway, what is planned, and how best to ensure that when we are moving rapidly to identify and deploy safeguards necessary for secure internet routing, we've got some common agenda and framework in mind. So today's workshop promises to advance this effort by looking at mitigation approaches, including emerging BGP security advances, and identifying steps that need to occur to reach this common objective. I believe with education, collaboration, and the collective expertise of the people in this room, at this table, and online, we're going to make our communications networks and critical infrastructure more secure. Everyone here has a role to play in that effort. And we stand at the FCC ready to support the development of industry commitments to quickly adopt critical measures to make BGP even more secure. So it is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague in this effort working alongside us, and that's Director Jen Easterly of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Thanks, Jessica, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for having me here. I'm actually super excited to be at this workshop. You know, about a year ago, we started working with Jessica and Deb and the great team here to talk about our concerns with internet security, and specifically with Border Gateway Protocol in particular. And so we were really excited to see the FCC's announcement last year that they were taking a hard look at internet routing. And as the audience can read in the public comment that we provided, we think it's both a really important and really, really difficult problem with no silver bullet solution. We really need to consider how we can bring all the tools to bear on an issue that, as Jessica just said, impacts everyone who uses the internet. As the nation's cyber defense agency, we at CISA are aware of the potentially severe consequences that Border Gateway Protocol, or BGP, disruption can pose to national security. And that's why I'm so excited to see this workshop, because this workshop is so critical to helping us get after this problem. We know every day worldwide internet users become targets of cybercrime and other malicious cyber threats that can cost untold losses and compromise sensitive data. And the only way that we can address the risks of this is to work together, as the chairwoman was saying. Now, as we know, BGP is a central function of the internet. I had not heard the napkin story, but I'm going to use that at some point in time. And because the internet enables critical functions from banking to healthcare to emergency responders, disruption can really impact the services that Americans rely on every hour of every day. And I know everybody in this room is likely familiar with a list of accidental and malicious events caused by BGP vulnerabilities, some noteworthy, some probably only known in very specific detail to the networking community, but all of them underscore the persistence of the problem. And this group knows better than anyone that the problem is actually bigger than BGP. The risks related to BGP, domain name system, and public key infrastructure all combine to provide opportunities for exploitation by adversaries to undermine what we rely upon every day. And it's why we need solutions now, and it's why, frankly, this workshop is so incredibly timely and important. You know, unfortunately, network operators, other participants in the internet ecosystem have not all implemented the available solutions to improve BGP and routing security, such as source address validation, route origin validation, and unicast reverse path forwarding. And it's likely that more comprehensive solutions will actually take more time, take too long to implement without greater focus and attention. So at the same time, the U.S. must be an exemplar in this space and lead by example. And we remain committed to taking all positive steps to do this. And in particular, we at CISA are working to catalyze industry and government action in this area to accelerate progress through planning and coordination, including through the FCC's Communications Security Reliability and Interoperability Council, known as CISRIC. We've also prioritized the importance of creating technology products that are secure by design. And that means that strong security must be baked in, not bolted on. And we focus significantly on software manufacturers who should make security a standard feature of virtually every single technology product and ensure that the products are purposefully developed, built, and tested to significantly reduce the number of exploitable flaws before they're introduced into the market for broad use. Now, these same principles should apply to networking infrastructure and protocols. But here's the catch. Everyone has to agree on the networking design elements and implement them correctly and consistently. The designs have to be practical and scalable and secure against threats past, present, and hopefully future. And each software manufacturer has to implement these designs knowing how past compromises have worked and how our most advanced adversaries will up their game. And each software manufacturer, and on a regular basis, we see repeated software engineering mistakes, and that needs to change. We need to stop making the same old mistakes that malicious actors have long since learned how to exploit at scale. And internet service providers have to deploy and maintain these implementations. All of that is, as we know, no small ask. The good news is several large network operators, several in this room, and service providers have stepped up and undertaken vitally important steps to lay the foundations for a more secure routing system, such as dedicating resources and expertise to implementing resource key public infrastructure, RPKI, and route origin validation. More network operators are signing up to the mutually agreed norms on routing security as well. These service providers understand their responsibility to act where end users who have limited ability to manage risks created by weaknesses in the internet's routing system cannot. And that's really the key focus of Secure by Design. It's really shifting the burden of security to those best prepared to bear it. And that's also a key piece of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, of course. Now, there's more we can and must do. First, we need to ensure that all network operators, not just the largest carriers, are do everything they can to strengthen and expand our PKI and route origin validation. And now this will require assistance from some of our larger industry partners who are well-versed in how to implement these measures to help demonstrate the business case for others to follow in their footsteps. Second, some of the most important steps that BGP security must be accomplished at the network edge. In this context, CIOs and CISOs of organizations large and small play a really important role. The need to send clear demand signals to ISPs about the importance of BGP security to include whether they are implementing route origin validation. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we fully acknowledge that the U.S. government is lagging behind on BGP security practices, and we are working hard to improve here. We're collaborating with the Office of the National Cyber Director and the Office of Management and Budget to chart a clear path forward toward cleaning up BGP security practices among all federal agencies. More generally, we're working to improve data collection to more fully understand the risks of BGP vulnerabilities, as well as to help network operators respond to route leaks and BGP hacks more quickly. Look, bottom line, this is a global problem that requires a community solution, and we really look forward to making progress in the coming year. And that's why this workshop and our collective efforts are so fundamentally important, because securing BGP is about a more secure internet for all of us. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chairwoman Rosenworcel and Director Easterly. I'd like to introduce Ken Carlberg now, Chief Technology Officer for the Bureau, who will facilitate the rest of the agenda. Ken?
Thank you, Deb. I thought what I'd start off with before we get to the first speaker is observation about the responses we received with respect to the BGP NOI that came out last year. One of the interesting aspects was that it came from a wide swath of folks. We had not only ISPs, but also the cloud providers, vendors, standards organizations also applying. And even, I wouldn't say even, but academia as well, which I think really represents a complete and rather holistic attempt at responding and providing input to the subject area. So with that in hand, we thought we'd also produce, maybe not to the same degree, but a similar workshop that also covered several different areas and not just focus on one particular organization or type of organizations. To begin this effort, though, and to begin the workshop itself, we thought it also would be good to start off with a general, brief, as one could do, in terms of description of the problem and some of the solutions that you'll be hearing about. And for that, Doug Montgomery from NIST will be our first presenter, and the floor is yours.
Slides come up. There we go. So Ken asked me to try in 10 or 15 minutes to characterize where we are in the problem space of BGP security and emerging solutions. So as we alluded to in some of the opening comments, right, BGP has very simple origins, or at least as the story is told. There was mention of the three napkin design, pictured in the right as one of the napkins. But often when you hear descriptions of the current state of BGP, right, it is described as being a simple protocol and relatively static, that nothing has changed much in 25 or 30 years. And that is absolutely not the case, right? BGP has been extended in many, many ways to be used in different contexts, not just in interdomain routing. When I made these slides, I looked at the IETF site. There's over 300 specifications that reference BGP, either adding features, augmenting capabilities. So it is not a simple and a static system. It is the foundation of the public internet. It's used to exchange routes between, roughly 100,000 autonomous networks and exchange reachability information to roughly 1 million different destinations. Fundamental to BGP in the design is some very fundamental requirements, probably the strongest of which is the autonomy of network operators to make routing decisions, right? Is that BGP was designed to allow network operators to make their own routing decisions based upon their own route selection policies, to implement policy-based routing, to limit the exchange of information to certain parties, to hide information, and nowadays to enable complex topics like traffic engineering and DDoS mitigation. And the world in which ISPs run BGP and the public internet now is very complex, right? They use all of those mechanisms to orchestrate information flows across the internet. The vulnerabilities are often discussed in examining specific events, but I actually think there was a very good RFC produced, BGP security vulnerability analysis, that kind of really cuts to the essence of the problem, right? Is that BGP, as mentioned generically in the protocol, does not have integrity mechanisms. And so that people can alter BGP messages in flight, changing the content of path attributes and address elements in the messages. It has no authentication mechanisms, right? So there's no way to easily identify in the protocol who is the rightful owner or holder of addresses or autonomous system numbers. And it lacks authorization mechanisms. There's no way in the protocol, as originally designed, to tell who is authorized to announce certain routes and who possibly has interconnections or peerings to others. And it lacks general scoping mechanisms, right? The ability to limit the flow of information to respect routing policies and normal conventions. These systemic vulnerabilities sort of result in a series of threats that include prefix hijacks, altering the intended destination of traffic, route hijacks, altering the path between destinations, either redirecting traffic along suboptimal or unattended routes, and a problem called route leaks, where routing information gets extended beyond its intended scope, often causing failures of either large-scale congestion or running into data plane policies that cause routes to drop. Others in the agenda are going to talk more about risks, but I wanted to say just a couple of things. One, BGP security incidents. So I'll try to call events incidents to stay away from the issue of trying to sort out whether they're malicious or accidental. But incidents can vary in lots of ways, right? The intent, whether basically it was accidental or malicious, the scale, the number of destinations impacted, the range, what part of the internet was impacted by the event, the duration and the frequency. These are all different attributes of various events. On the issue of attacks versus accidents, there's the famous saying, right, never ascribe to malice that which can adequately explain by incompetence. But one thing I always like to note is that any act of incompetence can easily be replicated by a malicious actor. So I'll let others on the agenda talk about risks. Let's talk about the emerging solution space a bit. So despite what it might seem, the problems of BGP vulnerabilities hasn't been ignored. There's a very long history of solution designs that have progressed at various stages around sort of a technology maturity cycle, from research to design to standardization to commercialization and wide-scale adoption. Historically, most of the ones in the past have received limited progress around that scale, although things like IIRR filters are reasonably widely implemented. So there's a wide range of solutions out there, both historically and currently on the table in standardization. I think it's interesting when you talk about solutions to very carefully look at the attributes of the solutions, right? The threats that are addressed by the solution, in particular, whether they stand up to malicious attacks or not. The objectives of a mechanism, whether it's meant to only detect an incident, whether it's meant to mitigate an incident or possibly prevent it, basically whether they're reactive or proactive. Implementation scope is very important. What changes are required of BGP? Is it only changes of BGP that is sort of internal to a router? Does it change the protocols on the wire? And really, does it involve out-of-band systems outside of BGP that have to be implemented and deployed? Always issue is to look at the operational requirements, both the burden on routers and the burden on those who manage routers. Partial and incremental deployment, nothing will ever be deployed 100%. And things in a large-scale individual network and the global internet will always be incrementally deployed. Do the mechanisms work in those scenarios? What are their limitations? looking at behavioral impacts of solutions when they're deployed. How does it affect BGP routing, stability, convergence time? These are all important issues. And really looking at adoption, incentive, and barriers, whether the cost and the complexity of the solution aligns with the benefits, and looking at the maturity of the commercial products and services it takes to implement it. I'm from a standards organization. We get excited when standards are published, but ISPs need mature commercial products to be able to roll out and deploy solutions. I'm going to talk about 3 things that are sort of in different stages of maturity. If you think of that maturity cycle, the resource public key infrastructure and its use in route origin validation, path validation, which is something that has completed standardization but hasn't achieved commercialization yet, and a few issues in route leak mitigation and address validation that are in the process in the IETF. So we've mentioned the resource public key infrastructure. The RPKI is a special purpose X509 infrastructure that's really about issuing certificates to resource holders, holders of addresses and autonomous systems. Owners, people who've been issued resource certificates can sign other objects and publish them in the system to achieve other goals. Those objects sort of use the hierarchy of res certs to allow them to be validated. Basically, the validation ensures scoping, that you had the right to create these objects. The first object of interest is ROAs, route origin authorizations, and they are how an address holder describes the autonomous systems that are allowed to announce its prefix, right? Remember the original list of vulnerabilities, we lack an authentication model. The RPKI itself addresses the authentication model. How do we know who is allowed to create the objects that talk about the authorization model? So RPKI ROAs are reasonably simple. You specify the networks that are allowed to announce prefixes, and you can validate those up the res cert hierarchy. There's also a back-end system to the RPKI where these signed, both res certs and signed objects are published, called RPKI publication points. That allows this data to be pushed out publicly so that any ISP or network can download them. Origin validation. RPKI ROV, route origin validation, is, if you will, the consumer side of this equation, right? The RPKI and ROAs are how you publish information about who can originate your routes. ROV is the consumer side, mainly implemented in networks and ISPs, where you download the objects from the global RPKI repository, perform X509 validation on them to ensure that they are created by the authenticated owners, and take that distilled information and feed it to a BGP router, right? BGP routers can then, they get a very simple piece of information about an address prefix and an ASN number, an autonomous system number allowed to announce that prefix. The routers have a standardized algorithm that they compare that ROA data to received routes and tag routes as being either valid, invalid, or not found, right? So it works, and at least it recognizes partial deployment. ISPs then set a validation policy about what they want to do with that result. The most obvious is to ignore routes that are deemed invalid by RPKI. When we talked about the attributes of a solution, the key thing about RPKI is that, route origin validation, is that the BGP protocol on the wire is unmodified, right? The messages are completely unchanged. There is this large out-of-band information system, right, that collects ROAs and res certs, feeds it to routers. One of the architecture that is described in the IETF draft does the X509 validation of those objects in a different system called a validating cache, or sometimes called a relying party. And so there's no crypto on the router when we talk about computational costs of implementation. The problem with RPKI ROV is that it doesn't address malicious path manipulations. And so while you can tell which ASs are authorized to announce a prefix, a malicious actor can easily stick that ASN at the beginning of the route, making it look like the route originated at the authorized location, and send an update. In terms of the maturity cycle, the RPKI services are available in all RIRs. They have mature services that have certainly matured in various ways over the years, but are now significantly more performant, better APIs, have some security checks in them, if you will. There is software for the relying parties, and there is RPKI is implemented in many commercial routers and open source implementations. There's lots of measurement about the deployment status of RPKI. In the global internet, something like 45% of the announced routes are RPKI ROV valid, 39% of the address spaces. IPv6 is a bit better on that. Tracking who is actually filtering on that is a hard problem. There's lots of anecdotal information, and there's people in this room who could probably tell us more about who is actually filtering on RPKI ROV information. But the thing to know is that to objectively measure that is a difficult problem. There's various projects that try to do that. I think one thing that's very interesting is there's been research both in commercial companies and in the academic world, and NIST does some of it, looking at the system dynamics of RPKI ROV, right? Back to that attribute of understanding how the system performs, either end to end in the production of routing security data all the way out to routers, how stable the system is, how it's affecting the flows of traffic. So the maturity and the amount of analysis of that system is certainly grown. Path validation. There is a spec called BGP SEC that adds hop-by-hop digital signatures to the BGP path. In that maturity curve, it has completed standardization. NIST did a lot of work on those RFCs. And it leverages, once again, the RPKI as the underlying trust infrastructure to distribute router keys. It is a significant change to the protocol, both on the wire, the packet formats change, in particular the path element, and it performs crypto on the router, right? The routers have to be able to do crypto validation of the signatures and generate the signatures. So there's lots of concerns about the operational impact and wide-scale deployment, although as a global solution, although there are certainly folks stepping forward who are interested in path validation on very limited sort of private peering scenarios. Reference implementations exist of the protocol in various forms, but commercial implementations, as far as I know, are still lagging. A few quick words about route leak mitigation. There's this problem known as route leaks that in general BGP tends to want to flood information if left to its own designs. And quite often if you left it to its own designs to flood information in all directions, it would create routes that somewhat violate the business properties of the internet, right? ISPs are prepared to represent and exchange routes for all of the customers that are in their cone. These are the people that there's at least a transitive business relationship with. But quite often you get routes that violate the notions of what is known as valley-free routes, that once a set of routes either start down a customer cone, they should only continue to go down, or that they should only cross one private peering link. These events happen all the time. They actually cause catastrophic outages in the internet. And so there's a couple solutions that are advancing through the standards. One is a simple solution, well, I'll call it simple, the picture looks complex, called BGP Open and only to customer. It's a notion that BGP routers on every single peering session would have some notion of their role respective to the other side. Are they a customer of the other side? Are they providing transit? Are they a peer? And in the BGP Open message, right, they would negotiate that and see that they agree on the role. And there's a optional transitive attribute that's added into BGP that once an update crosses a lateral peer link or goes down, this attribute is called only to customer, you would add this attribute into the protocol to pass along saying, this route should only go down from this point. Relatively simple changes to the protocol. It does put different content in the packets on the wire, but it's an optional transitive attribute that in theory, routers that had never heard of this should be able to implement or let pass through. The last thing I'll talk about is ASPA, a second solution to the route leak problem. This one is a different approach. It publishes new objects into the RPKI in which autonomous systems describe who their providers are, right? So we have these new objects that get pushed into the RPKI that describes part, if you will, of the tree of interconnections, right? But only talking about who your providers are. You push this information in the RPKI using the same rules for signing and scoping in the RPKI. The objects can be downloaded by the same validating caches and fed to routers. And there's a new algorithm that allows you to begin to examine these objects to determine whether a route is effectively valley-free, that it has only either gone up a series of providers and down a customer cone across one peering link, but in particular detecting routes that violate the usual peering policies. What is interesting is ASPA adds some sense of verifying whether a route is feasible or not. It is not path validation. You cannot tell that the actual prefix traveled the set of routes, and it's still subject to some forms of path manipulation attack. So while it's not as strong in its security properties as BGPsec, it is a good solution to the route leak problem and provides some level of path validation. And that's it.
Thank you, Doug. That was very helpful. It also puts the first step here, because clearly a number of these things are going to be items that our other speakers are going to be talking to. We're going to stay with the segment in terms of our federal speakers. We have 3 more. The next one will be Brian Scott of ONCD, who will be talking about the National Cybersecurity Strategy, of which BGP will be one of the items. Brian.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk with you this morning. That was a great presentation by Doug. I'm going to raise it back up just a little bit higher to the strategic aspect of why do we care about all that information. See if I can get the slides to work. There we go. So, as most of you know, the United States National Cybersecurity Strategy, the President issued it in March, and then the implementation plan was released about 2 weeks ago, just a little bit more than 2 weeks ago. President Biden noted in the strategy that we must ensure the internet remains open, free, global, interoperable, reliable, and secure, anchored in universal values that respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Digital connectivity should be a tool that uplifts and empowers people everywhere, not one used for repression and coercion. As this strategy details, the United States is prepared to meet this challenge from a position of strength, leading in lockstep with our closest allies and working with partners everywhere who share our vision for a brighter digital future. Again, high strategic information here. The National Cybersecurity Strategy builds on existing efforts and also calls for 2 fundamental shifts. First, we need to rebalance the responsibility for defending cyberspace. Today's digital ecosystem too often devolves risk downward onto individuals and small businesses and local governments, asking those with the least capability or resources to be our first and last lines of defense against all the world's malicious cyber actors, including nation states. The digital ecosystem's most capable, best positioned actors be they public or private, can and should assume a greater responsibility and burden for mitigating that risk. Second, we need to realign our incentive structures so that governments, businesses, and others can invest in long-term resilience rather than having to focus every day on just responding and reacting. We're always going to need to respond and react, but we really need to focus on that longer-term resilience. The strategy advances these two pillars across, the strategy advances these two shifts across 5 pillars. First, we need to defend critical infrastructure. Second, we will disrupt and dismantle threat actors using all the instruments of power, national power, to make malicious cyber actors incapable of threatening the national security or public safety of the United States. Third, we need to shape market forces. We will shape market forces to drive security and resilience. Ensure that market forces place responsibility on those within our digital ecosystem that are best positioned to reduce risk, and shift the consequences of poor cybersecurity away from the most vulnerable. Fourth, we'll invest in a resilient future through strategic investment and coordinated collaborative action. And finally, we'll forge international partnerships to pursue shared goals. So let me go to this slide. This slide, I think, is the best slide I've seen. It gives you all of the strategic objectives of the National Cybersecurity Strategy on one page. Underneath the 5 pillars, you'll notice there's 27 strategic objectives. Of specific interest to this group is Pillar 4, invest in a resilient future. A key strategic objective there is to secure the technical foundation of the Internet. The strategic objective states, preserving and extending the open, free, global, interoperable, reliable, and secure Internet requires sustained engagement in standards development processes to instill our values and ensure that technical standards produce technologies that are most secure and resilient. And we must take steps to mitigate the most urgent of pervasive concerns, such as BGP vulnerabilities, unencrypted DNS requests, and the slow adoption of IPv6. And further, the federal government will partner with stakeholders to develop and drive adoption of solutions that will improve the security of the Internet ecosystem and support the research to understand and address reasons for slow adoption. The implementation plan consists of 69 initiatives, and I would note that the plan is a living document, and beyond the 69 initiatives, there are other numerous activities that are ongoing. The implementation plan includes a specific initiative which will build upon the efforts of and interests of this workshop and the people that are attending here today. Initiative 4.1.5, secure the technical foundation of the Internet. Collaborate with key stakeholders to drive secure Internet routing. This was developed in consultation with many of our federal partners and with several and many of our private sector stakeholders. The OECD, in conjunction with the appropriate federal government entities, which include NIST, NTIA, FCC, CISA, DOJ, ODNI, and other key stakeholders from the private sector, will develop a roadmap to increase the adoption of secure Internet routing technologies by, number one, identifying security challenges, looking at approaches and options to address the routing and security concerns, identifying and informing the development of best practices, identifying need of research and development, and identifying barriers. So, all of these, to that end, we will be looking to build on the efforts of this group. We're going to be convening a set of stakeholders to look at and consider approaches as we move forward, but all of that builds on what we hear today and builds on the work of this group. We intend to be informed by and leverage previous and ongoing work. There's a great body of work that's been ongoing, as Doug just mentioned, such things as the CISRIC from FCC, the Manners Initiative, the work of the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, the NSTAC, and NIST work in developing security guidance and practice guides related to both emerging BGP security and resilience technologies. So again, we are in lockstep. The White House is very supportive of the efforts of this group. We are in lockstep with our federal partners and look to work with the private sector stakeholders to move this forward and improve the security of our internet ecosystem in our nation. So with that, I look forward to hearing your perspectives today and look forward to the comments as we move forward on this. This is a very important initiative, and I thank you all for being here and attending today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We will continue, and the next speaker will be Jeanette McMillan from ODNI. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeanette McMillan, and I am the Assistant Director for the Supply Chain and Cyber Directorate in the National Counterintelligence and Security Center in the Office of Director of National Intelligence. Yes, it takes 2 business cards to get my title down. But first of all, thank you so much for the welcome here for us to be here today, and also for supply chain to be at the top of the list. Normally, supply chain comes right after lunch, where people have just, come back from this workshop. But I will not belabor any of the wonderful points that the other speakers have been made here, but more importantly, just provide to you what we are trying to do here in the intelligence community. It was very wonderful, the presentation that Doug did, but one of the 3 principles that we always have in supply chain are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. BGP would not survive our normal checklist here when we're talking about those 3 attributes when we're looking at supply chain availability. Also adding in the 4th pillar, as we all know from our Department of Defense friends, which was security. So having those 4 pillars together, obviously bringing a collective group of experts here today is something that we need to do to make sure that we can get our supply chains together. One of the things that NCSC has also done is taken a look at it from a counterintelligence perspective. I know our friends over at NIST do an all hazards thing. I'm worried enough about foreign adversaries in my supply chain, let alone hurricanes and earthquakes and things of that nature from an all hazards perspective. But we certainly take that NIST philosophy and bring that into the counterintelligence and security realm. And we have already seen what our counterintelligence adversaries can do with vulnerabilities of this nature, of this kind. We know exactly what our enemy would be able to do with something like this, so getting a handle on it now and understanding that there's not one silver bullet, not even a couple of silver bullets potentially, that can get that done. But I know that what we can do together here is make sure that we have those things in place from a technology perspective. NCSC, I believe, back in 2021, took a look at all the technologies that are out there, emerging, things that we haven't yet decided we are going to have to depend upon today. Bless you, sir. Especially when people were writing things on the back of a napkin, who knew how vital this internet thing was going to be to all of the things that we do on a daily basis. So looking at forward and thinking about those technologies, we said, what are those things that we know that we have to have our advantage now and maintain it into the future? AI, quantum, autonomous vehicles, bioeconomy, semiconductors. We all rely upon secure digital infrastructure. Securing the internet and securing BGP is part of that. But I really like the opportunity here to include supply chain security, because if we get to a wonderful solution and we get to all of those things, but the providers of that particular technology, there's only 2 or 3 that can do it, or only 2 or 3 that can do it at scale. What are we going to do when we have decided those solutions and then we haven't built the supply chain infrastructure to support those solutions? So again, with that, I will stop. I'm welcome to be here and welcome to have the ideas and make sure that the intelligence community is here and supporting you as we go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeanette. And so to take the anchor position with respect to the federal speakers will be Ben Goldsmith of the Department of Justice.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. As mentioned, my name is Ben Goldsmith. I'm the Principal Scientific Officer at the Department of Justice National Security Division, and I'm here on behalf of an organization that has a name that's almost as much of a mouthful, I think, as Jeanette. The Committee for the Assessment of Foreign Participation in the United States Telecommunications Services Sector, commonly known as Team Telecom. Team Telecom's mission is to advise the Federal Communications Commission on risks to the national security and law enforcement interests of the United States associated with applications for telecommunications licenses meeting certain thresholds for foreign ownership. Additionally, since the President signed Executive Order 13913 in April 2020, Team Telecom is authorized to conduct reviews of existing licenses for any new and additional risks to U.S. national security and law enforcement interests, which acknowledges the ever-evolving nature of the threat we face. To put us in context a little bit, where Brian was talking about the strategic and Jeanette was providing the threat perspective, we at Team Telecom focus heavily on the operational, in particular to risks to the U.S. telecommunications sector. We've historically focused on FCC applications, authorizations, licenses, and petitions, addressing the risks emanating from allowing foreign providers and foreign owners into trusted domestic networks and markets. This included not just person-to-person communications like the phone, but also networks for broadcasting one-to-many like radio and television. More recently, much of our caseload addresses networks used for purely digital communications and infrastructure that facilitates global cloud architecture and the sensitive data that traverses it. Across the telecommunications industry, these markets and technologies have been converging since the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Today, there's less difference between technologies used for sending, receiving voice, video, and data than ever before. And this is happening not just at the level of content, where streaming services are supplanting video and VoIP is displacing plain old telephone service, but at the level of control, where standards like 5G allow providers to consolidate network management capabilities from specialized appliances onto fully virtualized systems running on general purpose hardware. As this shift occurs, Team Telecom believes it needs to shift its focus as well. As we all know, the internet is fully open and fully interconnected set of networks running on common standards and technologies. The idea that we can keep U.S. networks secure solely by shutting out untrusted providers is not just outdated, it's dangerous. A perimeter-based approach to security ignores the reality that modern technologies, which increasingly underpin every aspect of our society, connect globally and without considering security and trust. And while it may have been reasonable to trust everyone on the internet when it was created 40 years ago and those napkins were being written and everyone could fit into a bar, that's clearly no longer true. In recent years, America's communications networks have become increasingly attractive targets for espionage, sabotage, and interference. Such activities threaten the ability of our networks to provide crucial services to emergency services, to connect our critical infrastructure and facilitate sensitive government communications. They may also expose the vast amounts of sensitive information that passes through U.S. communications networks to malign actors, including foreign governments and other criminal actors. Team Telecom has noted how insecure network routing contributes to these threats in previous filings and activities. For example, our 2020 recommendation to revoke the 214 authorization to China Telecom cited numerous malicious activities, including a pattern of misrouting going back to 2010, and noted that other public reporting had claimed that this misrouting efforts persisted over months, including U.S. government traffic. CISA's reply to the FCC's notice of inquiry that triggered this workshop today noticed something similar, that foreign adversaries have shown willingness to exploit BGP vulnerabilities, and including noted that Russian-based autonomous systems were the most involved in the 23% of annual BGP misrouting incidents that were potential hijacks, stating that this reflects a larger historical trend. Now, the telecommunications industry and community has acknowledged the vulnerability in BGP protocols and the potential consequences of such a vulnerability for over a decade, but it has not tended to view this as a significant risk. For example, the 2013 report from the FCC's industry-led CISRIC, which has been mentioned a couple of times already, this was CISRIC 3, stated that while the BGP protocol itself provides a perfect mechanism for spreading malformed or maliciously constructed routes, BGP is in fact a quite robust infrastructure. Follow-up report in 2019 from CISRIC 6 didn't update this risk assessment. This assessment of low risk seems to come from a view of the threat landscape that largely excludes foreign adversary espionage and sabotage. The 2013 CISRIC 13 report that I just mentioned noted intentional manipulation is just one threat among many, grouping it in with normal business practices to reclaim space from a rogue customer, and law enforcement, government, and non-governmental pressure groups blocking access to certain IP addresses. CISA 19 kept pretty much the same view, and neither report specifically called out espionage or sabotage. Today, however, Team Telecom and the U.S. government as a whole are viewing BGP security as an increasingly significant risk because of the changing threat. As Brian mentioned, the 2023 OECD National Cybersecurity Strategy and its implementation plan highlighted the need to secure the technical foundation of the internet to include BGP, and this includes defending against a range of threats, including espionage, damaging attacks to critical infrastructure, and cyber-enabled influence campaigns. Team Telecom views such risks as sufficiently important to weigh heavily in its reviews. The decision to deny the Arcos 1 USA submarine cable application rested in part on a concern that increasing the exposure of U.S. internet service providers to the Cuban state-owned Texa telecommunications network would increase the risk of deliberate manipulation of internet traffic by a foreign adversary, in this case, Cuba. Team Telecom is here today because we believe that systematic vulnerabilities such as those that exist in BGP increasingly threaten the security of the national telecommunications networks we are charged to secure, and thus the national security of the United States. In our 2022 filing with the FCC, we noted that from a national security perspective, we believed that the status quo has not achieved and cannot achieve protection of the transmission of U.S. person data and communication in a constantly changing threat environment. And our view hasn't changed. The FCC NOI highlighted broad agreement across industry about the technological state of play and broad consensus about the available technical solutions. It also noted that adoption of these solutions lag both what is technically possible and what is being accomplished in other regions of the world. As a result, we strongly encouraged the FCC to consider the full range of technical policy and regulatory solutions and to implement an industry-wide approach to reduce the risk associated with these vulnerabilities in a measured yet expeditious way. And we stand behind that view. BGP security has been a known problem since the first version of the standard was published in 1989, over 30 years ago. There have been numerous government, private sector, and nonprofit studies on the nature of the problem, the threats, and the solution. The problem has been discussed at the technology, business, standards, and market level, to name just a few, and is very, very well understood. The issue, in our view, is decreasingly one of a lack of knowledge, and as a result, we think it's important to focus this conversation on building a strategy for collective action here. We also think it's important to begin talking about when we can, to figure out how we get ourselves to a place where we can stop thinking about this problem. At a policy level, the discussion on internet routing and security seems to have been dominated by a focus on BGP and DNS standards for decades. In that time, the internet has evolved radically. For example, where 30 years ago the internet was made mostly of telecommunications networks providing connectivity between independent data centers and server closets, today much of the internet runs on hyperscale cloud providers running interconnected global backbones, complete with fully owned submarine cables. The underlying structure of the internet itself has changed, even as the protocols have remained the same. As a result, we think it's important to begin looking ahead. This includes not just a refresh of thinking on the threat that puts national security threats like espionage and sabotage much higher on the list of concerns, but also a look at the underlying vulnerabilities of the internet itself. And in the discussion today, we'd also encourage everybody to begin thinking about and articulating what that threat after next might be, which we need to start thinking about how to address today. This will help us in the government and elsewhere begin to think about the concerns and the risks that we may not be looking at yet, but may need to address. And it will also help us determine where we should begin to focus the scarce resources and scarce attention that we have to address some of these concerns. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Ben, first. Our next segment will be a panel of ISPs, mostly ISPs, and they're going to talk about their individual efforts in supporting BGP security. At the table, we'll have Tony Tauber from Comcast, who will start the festivities, and followed by Nimrod Levy of AT&T, Elizabeth Gray Nunes from Verizon, and Catherine Condello from Lumen. And we'll finally finish with Tamara Ray from NTCA, who will give us a perspective from her membership, the rural providers there. And my goodness, we're on time still. So, Tony, if you could start first. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken, and for the rest for inviting me and the rest of us to participate in this. I'm excited and positively impressed by how mature the discussion's gotten. So I'm here representing Comcast, also a bit more broadly the cable ISP industry, and want just everyone to know that we've been involved for well over a decade, deeply involved in improving the state of play of routing security, working on these consensus-based models, involved in CISRIC 3, 4, 6, et cetera, that folks have mentioned earlier. Also worked almost a decade ago co-founding what's now called MANNERS, the Mutually Assured Norms for Routing Security. Started off being called the Routing Manifesto. That name was scrapped as being too political or something early on, so now we've got this handy acronym. Also working with the IETF and other multi-stakeholder efforts. Nimrod, Doug, and I, and a number of others that I see here are old friends and frequent flyers working, have been working together for years. So it's been very productive so far to approach it that way. Also, we've published a set of best common practices for the cable. The cable ISPs got together over the last few years. We published, I think, in 2021, a common practice paper that wasn't just for cable. It was broadly applicable on how to deploy RPKI and route origin validation technologies in your network. I personally gave a talk at NANOG, the North American Network Operators Group, on Comcast and my RPKI deployment journey that's available. And more recently, led a multi-stakeholder paper out of BTAG, the Broadband Internet Technology Advisory Group, discussing, again, BGP security, and that's available, published and available, kind of explaining the whole landscape, much as has been done today. Also, contributing some open source proof of concept tools for row automation. Good friend Rich Compton at Charter has worked on that, which has been a great help. And we've deployed Comcast and other major cable ISPs have deployed RPKI and route origin validation using RPKI information over the last few years, and it's led the way on that effort. Also, with source address validation, that's baked into the DOCSIS protocol, so that's another way that's been mentioned here that's important for combating distributed denial of service attack and IP address spoofing. Let's see. We've also, Comcast specifically, has been using some grant funding facilities that we have to help support open source tool development and measurement studies, because that is another way that we're demonstrating our commitment to the overall effort. As others have alluded to, part of the challenge with this has been some of the market dynamics, if you will, or the risk of deploying these new and unproven technologies, because it's a collective action problem where the whole ecosystem benefits the more people participate, and it can be hard to get the ball rolling, because the first movers assume the bigger risk and see the least benefit. So we've seen that over time, even though, for instance, RPKI as a technology and route origin validation using RPKI information has been specified for about a decade. It took probably a good 5 years before the ball really got rolling to get the largest providers participating, seeing the maturity of the implementations and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and due to the complexity and the variability of BGP, how it's deployed in different networks, how people use it, getting it to the place where it can be appropriate for a given organization, and they can deploy it in a way that's suitable to their risk profile, that it won't cause them more problems than we don't want the solution to the cure to be worse than the disease. So, those are some things that have kind of challenged the deployment, I think, over time. And I also should mention, Doug alluded to some measurements that have been going on, which is great, out of his shop over at NIST. And then there's a number of other places that have been doing it. One might look at those and see, oh, it seems that the deployment's lagging broadly in the internet. If we look at the overall percentage of BGP updates that are covered by ROAs, it's something on the order of 40–45%. It's grown steadily over time, and that's encouraging, but we're still under half. People may say, oh, well, we're not really making much progress. We need to speed it up and all that kind of thing. And really, that might not tell the whole story, because if we look at the traffic, and there was a study done by some folks at Kentic a while ago where they looked at net flow data and looked at the traffic flows on the internet, and the lion's share of the traffic flows, something approaching 60% at the time they did the study a year or two ago, were covered by endpoints, between endpoints that were covered by ROAs and secured using our PKI data. So that's more encouraging, I think, and a better, truer sense of what the status is. So those are things to keep in mind if people feel that we're really sorely lagging. And I'll say that Comcast and some of our siblings in the cable ISP industry have helped lead the way with coverage by ROAs of close to 100% of our announcements. Just a few other things I'd like to touch on. In an ecosystem sense, it's not just the network operator ecosystem, which is obviously important, the diversity of that gets involved, not only the ISPs and the content delivery networks, but also the enterprises. Those include governments, private businesses, public institutions, universities, and so forth. But there's also these regional internet registries, ARIN, APNIC out of Asia Pacific and the like. They're involved in making the solution happen. So it's not just industry, it's also those folks. It's also the network equipment vendors that make the code that supports these things. And they have their development life cycles. They have bugs that happen that need to get fixed. So those factors also play into the deployment of any new technology. And a couple of things that are even less appreciated and understood, I think, are the open source software implementers that make the relying party software that does the validation of this data. And those aren't covered. They have no viable and proven business model for what they do. So far, it's just been best faith effort. And going forward, what's to motivate them to keep developing and keeping up with the technology? And then, it's what's the proper approach for that is a little unclear. And lastly, I'd mention the open data warehouses, which is these collections that have gone on for probably close to 20 or more years that collect public BGP data. People contribute to them, and they're crucial in the ongoing study and appreciation of the growth of BGP and routing information. When there are problems, this is how we know there are problems. Academics study them, figure out what's happened in the past. It's also important for situational awareness, what's going on now, collecting data from all different vantage points on the internet. Again, best effort, contributing out of goodwill and with no long-term business model. So those are concerns that I'd like to get appreciated. Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nimrod Levy. I'm with AT&T. Thank you. I'm going to echo a lot of what's previously been said. AT&T and the rest of the telecom industry has a long history of working together with agencies through the CISA, through NTIA, through NSTAC, and other forums like NANOG and like the IETF and other groups like Manners. So we're always here to work together on these problems. And clearly, it's going to take a lot of different groups working together to work through all of these issues. Some of the things that I want to echo from a more technical perspective is that while we have seen a lot of increase in the number of ROAs published in the RPKI infrastructure, the realities are that this is providing a lot more benefit than some of those numbers reflect, at least for the prefixes that have ROAs published. Since many of the large tier 1 providers sort of in the center of the internet, if you will, are enforcing this validation, that really keeps any of these route leaks, these invalid routes that are being originated from propagating anywhere really significant. My customers care that they can get to the content providers that they care about. Those content providers tend to be very directly connected to my network, and so having a route hijack or route leak or prefix origination somewhere on the other side of the internet doesn't really doesn't have a lot of impact to day-to-day operations. So while there are measurements that show that the propagation distance of these prefixes has dropped by something like 50%, it really has much more operational impact than those numbers might imply. Not to say that we shouldn't be doing anything. We're definitely well involved in developing additional standards with ASPA and working towards reaching for BGP-SEC, and of course extending the existing infrastructure that we have today, getting more networks enforcing validation, always helpful to reduce that propagation distance even more, and getting more ROAs published. So that just helps protect those networks that choose to do that. One word of caution with that: it's very easy for a network to publish a ROA that's reflective of how things exist today. But if you don't have that procedure baked into your change processes, then it's going to cause an outage later on when dynamic networks change. You change where you're originating your prefixes from, or in the future with ASPA, where your upstream connectivity lies. If you don't have the ability and the process available to update those RPKI objects, then it will cause a problem. So, while it's great to extend these things, we should exercise just a little bit of caution in how we present and push networks to get ROAs published. Just a touch of caution with that, because we want to get it right. We don't want to cause more problems later. And along with that, there shouldn't. AT&T is currently performing validation at our peering edges, and we are publishing ROAs for many of our own routes. And as customers make requests for assistance in getting those things done, we provide them that as needed. Yeah, and so moving forward, we should continue to promote that and have I believe it should always be an opt-in sort of a network, that if we've built this infrastructure using our PKI, we have the validation enforced in the network, and as stub networks and smaller networks choose to take advantage of that, it's there for them for us to provide that protection. We're always there to assist that, and we should continue to work to implement manners practices, irrespective of your status of membership in manners. But it's always good to include those stats in your network. And continuing to support all of the best practices and software solutions that are there. And again, thank you.
Hi, y'all. I'm Elizabeth Gray Nunez, and I'm here today, as you know, to represent Verizon. I just really want to thank y'all for bringing us together today. Verizon, we really appreciate that protecting critical infrastructure in our nation has never been more important. The threats have really evolved and changed, and I think we've all seen over the last several years that it's a different world than it used to be when you're talking about the global internet. So at Verizon, we build security into our network by design. And I think other presenters have already really well explained how the internet is global and distributed, and there are a lot of risks. And in light of that, we really have worked hard and devoted a lot of resources to becoming a leader in routing security. So over the last years, we have been an active participant in the CISRIC process, both in developing the CISRIC principles, but then also we have implemented all of the principles that CISRIC has identified as important in our own networks. And one of those principles is joining Manners. So one of the things that CISRIC encourages us to do is join the Manners organization. I'm not going to lay out all these acronyms because I think we've all heard them. If someone wants to know what I'm spelling out, please, but we worked with Manners over the course of this year to show them that we have implemented the controls that they've deemed crucial to good routing hygiene. And I think that that's a really promising place for us to look as an industry to think about simultaneously having flexibility while still holding ourselves to the standards that are critical to doing the right thing in this space. So second, Verizon, we have really leaned in hard on filtering using the RPKI protocol. And we think that has really emerged as the leading way to secure our routes. And so we've been working on establishing filtering, and we've also been working very hard on deploying ROAs. So we have prioritized that work based on the level of risk that we see with the routes that we're registering. And we've also prioritized filtering because we see that that's where we as a Tier 1 ISP can have an impact not just on our own traffic, but also on the traffic in the broader ecosystem. So to date, we're very proud that we've deployed RPKI filtering for all of the routers that we use as peering points. And we've been working very hard, and we have registered ROAs for 75% of the routes in our dominant AS. And one thing that I want to note, Nimrod alluded to this a few minutes ago, but one of the things that I really wanted us to recognize is, and I am not an engineer, but this is what my engineers have told me, the folks that I work with, is that they've described ROA registration as brain surgery. And over the time that I've been learning about this, I've really begun to understand that that is true, that it's improperly deployed ROAs can actually pose a great risk to the internet and can cause significant outages and disrupt the reliability that we all consider important. So it's important, to quote the Wicked Witch of the West, these things must be done delicately, and they take time to get right. And we're committed to getting it right because we've seen that the risks of improperly registered ROAs actually really can cause accidental outages or route leaks. And so because of those risks, when we're turning up RPKI validation, one of the things that we're doing that we see as very important is working with our customers to educate them and to ensure that their routes are properly registered so that when we turn on filtering that's going to impact them, they are not having a problem with their routes getting through. So that's an example of how we can work with our customers and really make a difference. So in recognition that routing security is a team sport and we all have a role to play. And we see that we, as Verizon, as an ISP, we have an important role to play. And that means, our transit provider role means that we're deploying protections that benefit not just the traffic that we're deploying from our customers, but also traffic that's coming through our networks. And that's why we really have prioritized routing security and recognize that it's something that we really need to be very committed to. So our strategy, we have really laid out, and I think some of the other panelists have already gone through these, but what routing security means to us is we've rolled out RPKI filtering at our peering points. When customers request that we work with them, we help them prevent unintended network outages by validating their ROAs, making sure that they're not misconfigured before we turn up filtering on those ROAs. We've also, as I mentioned, been working to implement ROAs to our own address space based on the level of risk that we see, and also making sure that we get it right so that we don't cause outages or unintended consequences. We have, as a member of Manners, implemented the current Manners practices. So overall, our focus is filtering, anti-spoofing, coordinating globally to make sure that we're communicating around the world with our peers and making sure that we're involved in the global efforts to secure the internet. And we've also been participating really actively in ongoing efforts to develop best practices and also to provide education and coordination throughout the industry. And that doesn't just mean big players, that means everybody. And I think one thing that we particularly want to point out is the NANOG Forum. We've been participating for quite some time, but that's a place where there's a lot of active discussion going on and making sure that providers aren't being left out, and that this is something that all of the stakeholders have an active role in and can be involved in when developing the solutions. And to that end, we've also been an active participant in the processes to develop standards and best practices via industry organizations. And we see that as a really key part of this. So one thing that I think has been mentioned a little bit, but that I really want to emphasize is that it is really critical, in light of what Doug recognized, that nothing is ever going to be deployed 100%. That we, in order to maintain and grow the momentum that we've already begun throughout our industry and throughout the federal government, we need to coalesce around measures of success that are both objective and that are transparent. One of the things that we've seen is that there are lots of different initiatives to try to develop what does it mean to be getting this right? What does it mean? Where can you say, okay, we've done what we need to do? And some of those analyses, they don't have access to the information necessary to ground them in fact. And that's partially due to the fact that some of the information, when you're talking about looking at BGP deployment, routing security deployment rather, BGP is already out there. Some of this information, namely ROA registration, is publicly observable. Anyone can look at it, anyone can see it. When it comes to RPKI filtering, that's something that's only visible by the entity doing it. And so we want to make sure that when we're talking about measures, that they're incorporating all of the different things that an industry needs to be doing to get it right. And so we really want to continue discussing metrics and measurement of methodology, and we ask the Commission to continue to prioritize that, as something really necessary for us all to make progress. We would like to see us move on from the question of what does progress look like, and move on to let's make the progress. So, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we're not picking and choosing which solutions, and that instead we all feel that we've established these are the solutions that we need to do as a best practice. And we actually think a lot of that work has been already done via CISRIC and Manners and other organizations. So we're really, really encouraged to the way that the National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan, that's a mouthful, but the fact that it calls for collaboration and a collaborative approach with the government and with industry. We think that that's the coordination that's already been taking place, and the partnership that's been taking place has really led to some measurable progress. And we would like to see a continued partnership both with the public sector and the private sector to reduce global risk without disrupting platforms, while making sure that reliability remains something that, the everyday nature of the internet is not disrupted while we deploy these protections. So we want to reduce our risk exposure, but we don't want to disrupt everyday life while we do it. And we think that's extremely doable, but we also think that it takes coordination and participation from everyone involved in this ecosystem. And we really look forward to that coordination and partnership that's already been underway for some time. Yeah, that is what I wanted to cover. So thank you all very much. And I'll pass it over to Catherine.
Hi, Catherine Condello with Lumen Technologies, and all my peers in this room know that Catherine's always going to talk to you about operations. Since one of the thrusts of this ongoing and future collaboration is how do we more broadly adopt these kind of capabilities, and you've got 4 companies in front of you who have largely done this. I thought I would take a few minutes to sort of outline the 2-year process that Lumen undertook to be able to put RPKI on AS3356, which is the most deeply peered and interconnected AS in the ecosystem. We laugh about, I was laughing about it, we were talking about the three napkin 2008, because the first notice we have in the company started tracking this is actually 2008 coming out of that particular meeting. And we followed the whole process about developing, the RPKA standard, and continued to track it until, let's say, 2012. And it was only at 2012 where the engineers sort of felt like, maybe there's going to be something there, and then maybe there'll be vendors, and maybe there'll be demand. And so it became an active discussion and dialogue among our network operations folks. It was officially put on a 3-year routing roadmap for Lumen in 2017. It took a lot more work and analysis, and they started doing active lab testing in 2019. So a lot of time to sort of get through the various stages. We did actually cut over in first quarter 2021, so 2 years and counting. So I wanted to give you some of the steps that were part of this process. One, when you're going to do something like this is risky. This is a highly, deeply peered thing. So you need to tell your customers what's coming. You need to tell your customers what's going on. You need to tell your customers what you're working on so that they stay in the mix. We did not want them to be surprised. Lots and lots of ongoing dialogue, with our customer base globally to be able to keep them apprised of what we were doing. We found, because we were still relatively early stages, a host of hardware, software, hardware issues. When we started doing our network readiness testing, we discovered a problem with virtually every single piece of hardware that Lumen uses globally. And so we had to spend a lot of time, where, RPK as a standard, but how do you actually implement it in vendor A versus vendor B versus vendor option C, tons of topics and tons of dialogue between these things, and an active, heavy collaboration with all the major players in there so that the actual RPKI standard was implemented in a way within their hardware that was useful for us. Now, that's just the hardware for RPKI. Then there's the whole hardware, where, hardware is talking to hardware, and we had to check all the hardware to make sure they understood RPKI. We found that a lot of this RPKI software, once it was sort of squared away on sort of the basic stuff, couldn't actually be read, used, or in any form or fashion by a lot of our network elements. So we took that opportunity, just on top of everything else, to sort of go, well, we have to swap out equipment and move customers. And while one could argue that this is a lovely opportunity to do a network refresh, the level of engagement to be able to talk to our major customers, mostly enterprise customers, about, that system you've been on for 10 years, it's lovely and works for you and there's no problem with it. Guess what? We're going to move you on to something else because we're going to be doing this RPKI thing. Tons of interaction with our customers on this front. And then let's turn to the software. So after all the network, hardware stuff, then we had to make sure that we upgrade all the software on every single device that's on the AS3356 internet network. This was the single largest software upgrade program that Lumen has ever carried out, and I don't want to do it again. These three buckets of activity took substantive time, resource, people, expertise, vendors, peers, partners to sort of wade through all this. But when you've got a cone as large as 3356, you don't want to mess it up. Well, so I think as we've been going through all the RFI process, I think that the commission and other people had heard or talked concerns about a lot of the varying routing security concerns, but some of them that we were talked about the most, I think, was sort of the increase in load and in balance in terms of the actual processing that the network would need to do to be able to handle this. And sure enough, with the implementation of the new equipment, with new code and new software, we did see an increase in the control plane load. Nobody wants to mess with the control plane load. That's like, taking your hand off the steering wheel. Nonetheless, we spent a lot of time sort of balancing CPU, memory utilization, requiring various tweaks, which of course is a highly technical phrase, and to find that balance, for Lumen, for our architecture, for our traffic patterns, between the timeliness of the updates and the protection of the control plane. This remains an ongoing monitoring and balancing over even now. And then let's talk about the RPKI validation servers. Well, running RPKI on routers requires RPK validation servers, and given our size and our scope, we felt like we needed to have our own. And then because we were given our size, we felt like we had to be concerned about the availability and the scale of these validation things at any given time. So in our case, we chose 2 geographically separated validation routers per region, each operating on a different sort of software thing. Just in case one software kind of thing went down, we had an alternative one. These different validation methods, validation software methods, in case there was a failure, we viewed as being sort of, once again, how do you make sure things continue to run? These servers need to be specifically supported and monitored, since support for other kind of public servers, like the RIPE network, has ended. And so currently Lumen has over 65 million IP addresses across all 5 registries, and this is an ongoing, continuous effort. Now we get to the policy section, which is that, okay, so now we think we kind of got it squared away. What's going to be our routing policy? And Doug was talking about that a little bit earlier. Once we implemented the basic RPKI proposed protocol, there was a ton of discussion about how are we going to handle what are we going to do with this sort of thing. Lots of discussions ensued, lots of dialogue, lots of discussion and focus on what will be our relationship with our peers, what will be our relationship with our partners, what will be our relationship with our customers. And when it was all said and done, what we ended up deciding to do was to keep it simple and assertive, and we dropped any invalid prefix learned either from our customers or our peers. Finally, while our operations folks were all that and a bag of chips, it ended up being a huge whole-of-company operation, because all this dialogue with our customers meant that their sales reps, their sales engineers, the people that they work with, now needed to be fully brought in and educated on BGP and why they should care, why their customers should care, how do they help them. This whole training process started, back in the, let's say, 2019 timeframe. It remains one of the fundamental training that we do, whole of company, for anybody who has any kind of customer interaction. Well, whew. Good news is that once all the network upgrades were completed, the validation servers put in place, the staff was trained, the communications completed with our customers, the implementation of RPKI through 356 went exceptionally well. While the overall project took more than 18 months, the actual switchover, wholly consistent with manners, was completed within 24 hours with no issues. That was quite the happy hour. We anticipated, and we were correct, that we would end up dropping about 3,000 prefixes after the conversion, and that was pretty much bang on with no customer impact. So big sigh and big hey. What I guess I want to convey to you is this. The decision to implement RPKI was subject to a lot of discussion within Lumen. In this case, there is 0 incremental revenue associated with all the modifications and upware and software in the 0. And most importantly, it was a huge risk. A huge risk. Everything's working. Huge risk. Nonetheless, considering all the complexities, the 0 revenue, and the risk associated with it, it was indeed the emerging security issues that tipped the balance. So in case government thinks we don't pay attention to them, here you go. We have shared our experience in numerous venues with our peers, our partners. NANOG being one of the favorite ones. We have shared internationally. And we continue to work with our customers as they decide to take the plunge and to get their routes assigned. We hope more of our international peers adopt these kind of frameworks, and we certainly hope that more of our enterprise customers also take on the plunge, and we stand by and have the people in place to be able to assist. So Lumen is now again at that stage, back to the 3 napkin days, where we're now looking at the next iteration of BGP security in the standards phase, and we will start the cycle again. I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to the Commission for allowing me, Tampa Ray with NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, to join you today to share with you a glimpse of what NTCA members, small and mid-sized broadband providers are doing with respect to secure internet routing, what the Commission can reasonably expect small and mid-sized broadband providers to do to help strengthen the security of internet traffic, and what the Commission can do to help these providers achieve that objective. So to begin with, a glimpse of what they're doing. Some NTCA small provider members are using RPKI to create ROA on at least a portion of their prefixes. Other small providers have created route objects in ARIN for their IPv4 and IPv6 prefixes. For leased IP address space, the providers work with the lessor to create those route objects in a registry. Meanwhile, some upstream providers use route object information to automatically build prefix or route filters. In other cases, the small provider has prefix filters in place to prevent their customers from advertising unauthorized prefixes. Also, in some cases, the transit provider has prefix filters in place to prevent the small provider from advertising unauthorized prefixes. And in some cases, the small provider's transit provider requires the small provider to provide a letter of authorization for any new prefix. Finally, some small providers subscribe to a service that alerts the provider to abnormal patterns of activity related to their prefixes. So as you can see, NTCA members providers have taken measures to guard against advertising unauthorized prefixes and to be watchful for abnormal activities related to their prefixes. As you can also see, these small providers have taken different approaches to this important task. Allowing this flexibility is critical, as small providers vary widely in their size and capabilities. Some providers have only a few employees and even share a general manager with another small broadband provider, while others have as many as 30 employees. Regardless of their size, however, they all recognize how important secure, reliable internet service is to their community. So given the variety of techniques available for secure internet routing, combined with small providers' varying needs and capabilities, NTCA encourages the Commission to approach secure internet routing methods similar to that of the NIST cybersecurity framework. That is to say, allow small and mid-sized providers to pull from the guidance issued by CISA, Manners, and others, and have the ability to adapt that guidance to their own needs and capabilities. NTCA also encourages the National Cybersecurity Strategy also correctly recognizes that secure internet routing cannot be solved by internet providers alone, but rather requires the government and all industries, including cloud providers, working together to implement solutions. In doing so, however, the multiple government agencies tasked with undertaking secure internet routing for their sector must work together to ensure their guidance and recommendations can be adapted across industries and do not conflict with the guidance or recommendations taken by other sector-specific agencies. To demonstrate why secure internet routing depends on far more industries implementing solutions than just the ISPs, let me share with you a glimpse of the top 10 inbound traffic sources for one medium-sized ISP, which has approximately 12,000 users across a 24-hour period. The largest one came in with Google Video, 30.08 terabytes. Next was Amazon Video with 11.34 terabytes. Amazon Video, 7.2 terabytes. Number 4, Disney Plus, 7.13 terabytes. Hulu, 5.52 terabytes. Apple, 5.23 terabytes. Facebook, 5.06 terabytes. And we even have Netflix non-video downloadables, such as images seen when browsing titles, that took up 4.56 terabytes. And number 10 on the top 10 inbound traffic came at Akamai Technologies with 4.04 terabytes. So as this data demonstrates, most content is coming from large cloud providers and content delivery networks, as opposed to other ISPs. So if the Commission's focus is on protecting citizens from nefarious actors that misdirect the flow of traffic, large cloud providers and content delivery networks should be a part of the solution. If there are other vertical segments to look at, those would be corporations and organizations that deliver sensitive content, such as financial industries and healthcare. Also, when looking at solutions, the Commission should be mindful of ensuring secure routing methods are financially and technically feasible. The real cost for implementing base-level RPKI is staff knowledge, resource prioritization, planning, and coordination. Although the cost can be low, the required knowledge in internet routing is rather high. If RPKI is implemented incorrectly, as my colleagues have noted, or if a transit provider accidentally filters out their prefixes, the service provider's customers may be unable to access certain portions of the internet. As a result, some small providers have feared the risk is greater than the benefits. Whilst providers can implement some methods of secure internet routing with little or no cost, or even special expertise, most small, mid-sized providers do not have the resources necessary to continually monitor and immediately respond if a route is rejected due to a routing error. Again, you've heard from my colleagues this morning how critical that is to get it right. Furthermore, internet technology standards and best practices continue to evolve over time, and requiring a specific remedy may lull some into a false sense of security while discouraging others from undertaking better and scaled approaches. Therefore, expecting small and mid-sized providers to implement ROV could be costly both to the providers and to their customers without the success expected. Small providers, as well as mid-size, should instead be encouraged to undertake a risk-based analysis for secure internet routing. Based on that analysis, these providers should identify and use the secure routing method that works best for their network and their users. The Commission recently asked how large providers can help small providers implement secure internet routing. Most small providers, or so-called Tier 3 providers, do not peer with large providers. Instead, they purchase internet transit from Tier 1 or Tier providers and may peer at an internet exchange. Due to their rural nature, many small and mid-sized providers typically connect to the closest point of presence. Requiring these providers to instead connect to a large ISP in an attempt to increase routing security would likely result in higher transport costs and require traffic to be routed to a location further away, resulting in increased latency and higher costs to the consumer. Instead, small providers could benefit from interactive how-to webinars, similar to CISA's no-cost cybersecurity incident response training series that identify techniques appropriate for small and mid-sized providers to set up and maintain secure internet routing methods. NTCA also encourages the Commission to encourage companies that lease IP address space to support their customers in the creation of route objects. This would allow for the automatic generation of prefix filters that are desired and required by some transit providers, peers, and internet exchanges, along with signed prefixes to be able to do ROA. Finally, we encourage the Commission to work with Congress, the White House, and other federal partners to establish pathways to train more workers in the skills and background needed to implement and maintain secure internet routing at all companies, and especially in rural areas. So thank you very much.
There we go. Thank you very much for a number of the items that you brought up, actually, which including bringing up the notion of the content providers. Perfect lead on, because our last set of speakers will be 3 examples there, and so that's good to hear. We're taking maybe a few minutes for possible questions and answers from our federal partners or some others here at the table. One question that comes to mind, at least for me initially, is, and this is not necessarily directed to anyone in particular, but I was curious in terms of the clients that you have. Clearly, they're going to have, in a sense, a list of requirements or really priorities that they want to get to. One, obviously, is going to be reachability. I'm curious in the sense, does the subject, in the sense of BGP security, the ROAs, RPKI participation, is that, in a sense, a bit lower on the scale from your conversations with the customers, in the sense that, yeah, we'll get to it, but perhaps a little bit later, because we just want to make sure that we have the connectivity? Any thoughts on that?
It is not on the top 5 list of what customers want to talk to us about. Completely not. I think some of our customers are more sophisticated, in particular some of our government customers, and so they've started to probe, well, do we need to do something? You know, and so we can start to engage in that dialogue. And I know that in our sort of sector role, all of us have sort of started talking to our cross-sector risk management partners about, you know, you might want to think about this, but I think that's a role for government.
Interesting. Thank you. Were there any other questions maybe that came to mind? Steve? Yes.
Hopefully that works. Hi, my name's Steve Wallace. I'm from Internet 2. So I'm curious, creating the ROAs to protect your IP address space, it is brain surgery in the sense that if you get it wrong, you can cause a problem. But it's actually pretty simple. It's 4 fields on a web page, literally 4 fields on a web page. So I'd be interested to hear for service providers what programs you have in place to help educate folks about the importance and the utility of creating their records, and do you provide how-to sessions and any types of engagement to help them create these records, even if as a service provider, if you're still not at the point at using that information to protect their routes, other parts of the internet may be. So it's sort of, you create this simple record and maybe you get benefit for little effort. You have to be a little careful, but you get benefit from a little effort. I'm just wondering what the outreach is like from your organizations to your customers.
Hi. So for us, the customers, most of our customers are, you know, the lion's share are residential, so doesn't apply. I mean, we provide the IP address space. We provide IP address space for a number of our business customers too, but for people who have their own address space and bringing it to us, one nice feature of the RPKI system is that it devolves to the address holder to create the ROAs, and if they're operating BGP or if they're bringing IP address space that they want us to announce on their behalf, luckily for us, the regional internet registries like ARIN, which is most applicable in our case being US-based operator, have really good tutorials and documentation, and so I can send them there and say, read this documentation, answer, ask questions if you need to. ARIN will be able to guide you through it, because where in other systems like the IRR, the Internet Routing Registry, historically there have been this notion of proxy registration, which actually has been complicated and not optimal in a lot of ways. But now with this, the customer and the address holder, if they're an address holder, is in the driver's seat, and they can take control of it on their own, which is, I think, a better model. We just need to help guide them there. But luckily, ARIN and others have really good documentation for using their system, so I think that's been helpful.
Can I chime in here too? I just also wanted to bring up, Tony, I really agree that for Verizon, we have invested and participate really actively. I hate to say NANOG 3 more times, but when we've talked to our folks internally about this, they've said, yes, those educational resources exist. We've worked hard to develop them via NANOG. Yes, we have sessions where folks from maybe less sophisticated or resourced companies or other type, anyone that is a network operator can come and sit and ask questions and have an active dialogue about the ways that this might impact them, that they aren't sure and want some expertise from someone who has more time on this road. And for Verizon, it's really appropriate to focus education rather than doing it through the customer relationship, doing that via an independent organization like NANOG, like ARIN, where there's a lot of transparency about roles and about what needs to be done in a way that is consensus across industry rather than just being one company's opinion. For us, that is the most, not just the most efficient way to disseminate this information through the routing ecosystem, but also the most appropriate way that's going to stand the test of time as these issues, I'll say, percolate throughout the folks that need to be paying attention to them. And in our perspective, that's anyone that's a network operator.
Okay, thank you. Bob, did you have a question? Bob Cannon.
I sort of wanted to follow up with the Tony and Steve conversation on the one point, which is frequently in this conversation, frustration rises and people say, well, if this is the problem, let's just have the large do it for the small. Could you comment on the proposed solution where people are saying, if we're having the troubles that you talk about with small providers having insufficient resources to achieve these goals, let's just have the large do it. What would you respond to that proposition?
Well, since I opened my mouth before, as I said, for the RORA creation, when we assign some IP addresses for customers, we do that part for them. But if they bring their own address space and their address holders, again, it goes to them. We can't do it on their behalf, which I think on balance is a good thing. They have to buy into the system and understand it. I think, again, the documentation's been pretty good. On the ROV, on the validation using the ROAs, let's see, I wouldn't say that just having the large do it on behalf of the rest is the most complete solution. It does provide some benefits, but I don't think that would, I'm not sure that it's important for every single network to do the validation, but the more that do it, the better.
Okay, I think actually John wanted to say a few words, John Curran from Aaron, and then we'll get to Ben.
Thank you for giving me a chance to respond. I'm John Curran. I'm the president and CEO of ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers. Amongst other things, we're the ones that coordinate the registry on behalf of the ISPs in North America. And it is very true. I wanted to pick up on the education and outreach aspect. We are rolling out a new technology here, RPKI, which is not in everyone's wheelhouse organically. And so to that end, I just wanted to say, we have been doing help desks. We'll set up a desk at your conference. We've done them at NANOG, Nonstop, Internet 2. We've done them at peering forums. We're happy to do them at an industry conference if you have your customers together. If you have a large group of ISPs or network operators, we're happy to come and set up a help desk, and you can say, point people at ARIN. We consider this we're not here to say you need to do RPKI. We're here to say it's one more service. It's something you may want to turn on. If you need expertise in how to do it, we're here to help. We can't know every network configuration, but we can explain how to use the tools and some of the things you can expect when you're enabling it. So to the extent that people want resources that are sort of neutral or independent of their organization, please reach out to me. I'm happy to send the people on a help desk for a few days for your conference. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. Ben.
Thanks. One of the things I'm taking out, the gist I'm getting from this panel is that implementing RPKI is hard. So I'm curious, and there's more complication to it than that, but the thing that I was curious is that if we in the government believe that that BGP security is important, what can we do to make it easier?
I'll ping back again. One, I mean, I think a lot of the companies here, we sort of did the whole negotiation, working actively with the vendors. And so in certain respects, you can kind of consider that pioneering work done, you know, for some of the mids maybe, you know, maybe they don't have to have the discussion with vendor A, and we sort of did that. But I don't, once again, speaking to, when we converted, and I don't know what the other, you know, providers' experience has been, frankly, we expected more of a demand from our customers, because a lot of our customers are enterprises who, you know, are a little bit more sophisticated. It's not, you know, I wasn't trying to get the customers that do our broadband services and get Hulu and that sort of stuff. I wasn't focusing on them. I think we were a little surprised. So I'm not sure that the role of, you know, border gateway protocol security to the enterprise, whether it's a .com, .mil, .bank, .dam, whatever, is fully appreciated. I do think that's a potential role for government to be, you know, articulating that in such a way so that enterprises, particularly ones that you consider to be essential or important, you know, at least understand that there might be a risk, and they can make their risk decision about whether or not they want to take the direction and move forward.
And I'll add on to that and say that I really, Catherine, I agree with what you said. I think that there are certain sectors of network operators who are just better positioned to appreciate the importance of this work and investment than others. And so one thing that I think it would be very helpful is zeroing in on the sectors where we maybe don't see as widespread adoption or interest or understanding of the issue, and particularly critical infrastructure, utilities, especially when you look at the more local level, whether you're talking about municipal or state entities. Those are organizations that don't often operate with lots of disposable resources. They operate pretty pretty lean. And so it often, I think the role of the federal government in particular in helping connect the dots about why this is important to them, why they should care about it, why it matters, y'all are best positioned to do that. It's a different conversation coming from you than it is coming from us, just to be very frank.
And I wanted to add a couple points on a couple of different conversations that have been going on here. Just with respect to the large providers, doing it on behalf of the small providers, that's really the way the technology is constructed. It's not possible. Like it doesn't work that way. We don't have the ability to create objects with the correct signatures, digital signatures, and to be able to publish them on their behalf. And that's by design, because the intention is that only the holder of that resource is able to say this is how the route should be routed. It's not within my ability as their upstream provider to say that for them. They have to be able to publish that themselves. So in some ways we can't do some of that. The other thing is that the way I view RPKI in general is that RPKI is an infrastructure. 10 years ago we didn't have the capability to create certificates to represent any of these numbers. Now we do. Now we have the infrastructure where we can create them, we can assign them, and then we can publish objects that are signed with them. And as a technology industry, we're finding new ways to use this and evolve that ecosystem. We've started with route origin validation. That's in getting into really widespread use, and we've seen the benefit of it. Up and coming are additional features. Another application that's coming is ASPA. We're building those standards, and we hope to be able to use them in the coming years. It takes time to develop those things. It takes time to develop the software to work the bugs out of those systems. And we're going to get there, and we're continuing to leverage this system. And then once we have all of these things there, people will continue to see the value, networks will see that value, that they'll have this protection, that they're vulnerable if they don't, and they'll start using it. Part of it is time and experience with it. And now that we have some experience with this infrastructure that's being built, we can expect to see more rapid progress with the future applications using RPKI.
Just one thing to add on to that, with something like ASPA, which is considered a potential future application of RPKI, like with ROV, one size doesn't fit all, and figuring out what's appropriate for a given network and their place in the overall internet topology and how they use BGP. I mean, one thing about BGP is it's very flexible. People have used it in a variety of different ways, for better or for worse, and so it's not a case of one size fits all, that you can just go and paste this and deploy it on your network once it's ready and your vendor says, yes, we support it. It's not like a software that you just upgrade. The fix is in, the new version's available, download it and reboot like you do with your phone. It's not like that at all. So there's lots of complications. People need to understand that it's just mandating a particular technology get implemented. It does not solve the problem for everyone.
And if I can just tag in right at the very end to share from a small business perspective that one thing that we found that if we're to tell members or small companies to go through the process like what Catherine described Lumen went through, you're going to see a lot of letters of resignation coming in. But instead, what what we encourage our members to do, and I think it applies to small companies all over the place, to this really complex topic, and is to just take the first step. That identify, whether it's through the government or for getting groups of small providers together to say, what have you done to implement, and try to emulate that with other companies to try to do the same thing. As noted, that every network can be different and the solutions are different. But you know, I'm happy to say that we have invited Aaron to come speak with our CyberShare program, which is 75 to 100 small and mid-sized providers, on September 6th. It'll be virtual. And their task, which they have accepted, is to, in the course of about 45 minutes, tell them something that they can do with very little cost, very little expertise, to secure, take the first step towards securing their networks if they haven't, or take another step to securing their networks if they've already taken the first step, and do so in about 15 minutes after they finish that webinar. So perhaps we'll check back with you after then to see how we do.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we'll stop right there. We ran a few minutes over time, but we're going to take about a 14-minute break, and we'll be back at 11:20. Thank you. Well, given the side conversations, it sounds like a few interesting points came up. So we're going to start our next segment, and maybe for lack of a better term, we're putting this under the guise of guidance that can be provided from different perspectives. So actually, the next person up is Steve Wallace, who's looking at his laptop. Okay, and
that's the clicker with the slow response.
Yes, exactly.
And do I have to click it once to get the first?
Yeah, I think our ED
Okay.
Yes, bingo.
Cool. Thank you. My name is Steve Wallace. I'm the Director of Routing Integrity for Internet 2. And it is a little slow. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about all these technical controls that we've heard about before, and we're going to continue to hear about. So the Internet Routing Registries, RPKI, NS spoofing filters, BGPsec, ASPA. Not going to talk about those as much as I'm going to talk about, establishing a program to support the adoption of those by your community. So what is Internet 2? Internet 2 is a not-for-profit. We're a network service provider, but we don't provide full transit. So we don't provide full connectivity to the broader internet. We provide connectivity among research and education networks in the US. And then there are other networks like Internet 2, they're called National Research and Education Networks in other countries, and Internet 2 interconnects with those. So if you're at a university and you're doing research in collaboration with another university in the US or abroad, that traffic is typically automatically flowing over Internet 2. Now, our networks that we provide this connectivity to, the networks in the US, there are about 1,200 of them. So it's not a small group of networks. And if you look at, there's an organization called CISA that ranks backbones in terms of how large they are based on their level of connectivity, and Internet 2 is actually in the 50s. So we're, by their measurements, the 50th largest network in the world. So we interconnect about 1,200 of these networks. There are roughly 70 to 80,000 of networks defined by this definition in the global internet. And essentially our goal is to sort of reduce the friction of using advanced networking and other technologies for the research and education community. So that's what we do and who we do it for. This is a eye chart of where our fiber goes. So we have a fiber footprint throughout the US. And what is routing integrity? So routing integrity is the routing security stuff you've heard about, plus more. So there's more than the manners for actions that we've been hearing about to ensure the networks are forwarding packets the way you would expect them to. And so routing integrity for us means a little bit more than this. I'm not going to go into those details right now. What is a routing integrity program? So I argue that this is when an organization coordinates efforts to actually improve the routing security. So not the actual efforts themselves, but the organization stepping up and saying, we're going to do this. And if people say, well, what is this? And I usually say ensuring packets arrive at their destinations with no detours, no delays, no outages. And it's something that we all do collectively, and we all benefit from this collective action, each of us protecting all of us. So sort of the scope of the Internet 2 Routing Integrity Program, of course it includes the infrastructure Internet 2 operates, and we do things like route origin validation, and I share the pain of the providers that were up here in terms of rolling that service out. It's a production service, and it takes effort and additional operational support to support those things. We also support, and the program scope includes, and this is what I think may differentiate Internet 2 a bit from the other providers we've heard of. Our routing integrity program scope, in other words, our support for organizations extends to the regional networks. These are typically state networks that support research and education throughout the US. And it also goes down to the individual networks that connect to those state networks. And those networks frequently are campus networks. You can think of them as enterprise networks. Frequently, university campus networks are huge enterprise networks. So I used to work for Indiana University. Our Bloomington campus has, well over 100,000 internet-connected devices and has a massive network, equally comparable to large enterprises. In addition, the efforts in this program also extend to stakeholders. And one of those stakeholders is ARIN, our regional internet registry. And so part of our effort is to make sure that ARIN understands the needs of our community, and we're there to help our community understand what ARIN provides. So as John Kern mentioned, ARIN shows up at our meetings with a help desk. They do presentations, and occasionally we ask them for certain changes in their portal to help our community make best use of their services. So this is just kind of a overall picture, Internet 2. We also provide, in addition to interconnecting the research and education folks in the US to each other and to their peers abroad, we also provide high-performance connectivity to other federal networks like ESNet and NOAA. We provide connectivity to cloud providers, and as I said, other NRENs. So there are about 35 state networks that we connect to. And as I said before, there are around 1,200 networks that connect to those state networks. And the scope of our program goes all the way down to them. So components of our routing integrity program, targeted outreach. So I'm going to give you some specific examples of what I mean by this. The research and education community in the US was an early adopter of IP addresses. Many of the IP addresses held by campuses were allocated before ARIN existed. And for those holders of IP addresses to use services like our PKI, they actually have to sign an ARIN agreement. Well, the service providers have the best records about their customer status. So Internet 2, we look at the data in our network. Now this is data that's public data, so we're not peering into what people are doing, but it's relatively straightforward for a service provider, whether it be Internet 2 or Verizon or Lumen or any other network, to know their customers and the IP addresses that their customers have, certain things about those addresses. For example, are they protected by ROAs or not? In our case, getting back to the story, is we were looking at all of the addresses of our customers, figuring out which ones didn't have their ARIN agreements. Well, it turns out there are about 700 organizations that connect to Internet 2 that have their IP addresses. We're allocated them before ARIN existed. They don't know this, generally speaking. They're unaware of this. They're unaware of our PKI and the benefits it might provide them just filling out a simple form. So when we do outreach, we leverage the information we have about our customers to ensure that that outreach is useful and actionable by the targets. So, here's a case where we analyzed our customer information, determines which ones didn't have ARIN agreements. ARIN's fees are going up next year, so there's an incentive to lock in the lower fees this year. That helped. So we reach out to our customers. We let them know that, A, you can lock in lower fees, much lower fees for some, and B, we can't protect you. We can't treat you as critical infrastructure unless you do a few things. And one of the things you need to do is sign this agreement so you can get access to ARIN security services and create your ROAS. And we say, they want to know they are. First of all, they don't understand any of this typically. If you talk to a CISO at a large enterprise and say, what's a ROA? They're not going to know. It's just not something that's permeated into their space so that they're aware of this. So part of our role is to help with that messaging in this outreach. So we let them know, okay, you need to sign the agreement. Hey, you get a lock-in on a discounted fee if you do it this year. And we essentially say to them, do you want us to treat you like your critical infrastructure? And I assume if you want Lumen to treat you as though you're critical infrastructure, and you have your own IP addresses, you need to create ROAs. And that's a pretty straightforward message. That message is a message that is even accessible to a CIO, maybe a CEO. You want to be treated like critical infrastructure. There's a simple thing your technical people need to do. They need to do it correctly, but it's 4 fields on a form. Now, ARIN provides great support for completing that form. We also provide support to our community for how you complete that form. But it's the message from your, and we have a relationship with these organizations, as do the ISPs have a relationship with their customers and their downstream networks, where, I think a simple message literally is, you want to be treated like critical infrastructure. You have to do this thing. It's not the only thing you need to do. A lot of things you need to do. But there's this one thing that will buy you a lot, and it's pretty easy for you to do. Because we do route origin validation, if you do this one piece, you get to take advantage of it. And so, I think that's an important message and an important role for service providers. And that kind of was occurring to me as I was listening to all the progress the service providers have made in terms of supporting routing security features like route origin validation. So we have targeted outreach. We reach out to leaders about issues like I just described. We try to make these messages accessible, what the benefit is accessible. We also have outreach for people who are actually doing the implementations. This is even though we have really good network engineers in our community, these are relatively new technologies. They've been around for a while, but they haven't been adopted universally, for a long time. We also try to identify early adopters. I won't call their names out, but there are some actual early adopters in the crowd here. We try to identify early adopters and help them get their message out of the benefits they're realizing, because they're doing some relatively straightforward, simple things to improve their routing security. We have an education program, so it's not really complicated. We have webinars, we have workshops. We partner with other organizations to do workshops. We're doing a row-a-thon in October, and ARIN is going to help us with that. One of the things we have is office hours. And through the summer, these have been a little less frequent, but we'll typically have an hour or two each week or every other week where people can join a Zoom session and just ask questions about routing security. I'll get to this in a minute, but one of the reasons they ask is we produce reports for all of our customers that we update about weekly that outlines the routing security problems they may have. And so it's hard to get them to read them, right? There's a lot, getting someone's attention is an art now. But we produce information that's actionable on a regular basis, and then we provide a forum where people can reach out to us and say, well, what does this mean? I see I'm red here. What does that mean? What do I need to do to fix that? Can you help me with that? So we do those, and we provide some online resources. Reporting. So as I mentioned, we provide sort of a squawk list for all the routes that we receive from all of our customers, and we make those available to all of our customers. They're sort of publicly available. We publish them on Git. This is public information that anyone can construct from public resources on the internet. So this isn't confidential information, and all of the major providers have access to all of this information. We publish these reports, and we kind of determine who is taking advantage of protections by creating their IRR records, or who's doing ROAs, or their problems with their ROAs. And we publish this, like I said, typically a week, weekly, maybe every other week, and make that available. And occasionally we review these reports. And if there are particularly odd things in the reports, we'll reach out to those networks and say, we're seeing something unusual here. Is there anything we can do to help? Now, we don't do that directly to all 1,200 networks that we connect to. We leverage our relationship with our regional networks, and of which there are 35 or so. So we typically leverage those relationships. We'll contact a regional network and say, hey, we think one of your members may have a particular challenge, and we're here to help you with that. We also have something called a routing integrity assessment service, and we have a questionnaire, and it's public, and I don't know if I hope these slides will be published somewhere, but there's a link to it, and anyone can have access to it. But I mentioned routing integrity for us is a little bit beyond the manners routing security items, and we have an assessment that lets you kind of grade your own progress or maturity along the path to having a network environment that's doing what you expect it to do. Occasionally we'll have webinars where we'll walk people through the assessment. Sometimes people have questions like, well, here's a question in the assessment, we don't really know what it means, right? So we'll walk people through the assessment, but the assessment's there. So they walk away with something where they have a sense of where they stand and where they could have improvements. And these are all focused on routing. And there are many assessments published by federal organizations and some other not-for-profit organizations that maybe a list of security controls that you can use to sort of assess your maturity. Oh, wow, 1 minute. And and this one's focused on routing security because we didn't really find one that was equivalent, so we made our own. We adopt the best practices in our network. We know that's challenging, and I appreciate the pain everybody shared with doing ROV. And this is a scorecard of organizations that have adopted these practices within our network. And I'm going to skip to final remarks. I think the current paradigm of routing security has shifted some of the responsibility from the large, well-equipped providers to the address holders. And we're trying to balance that with a program that provides outreach and support to the people that hold those resources. We see that missing from other sectors, and it's concerning. It's the whole internet. It's just not the research and education part. And we'd like to encourage providers to provide more direct outreach. You have all the information about where your customers are in this maturity model, and there are pieces which are not too difficult if they want to be treated as important, and you've done these hard things to provide protections, they can't take advantage of them. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve, let's see. Next is Doug Montgomery from NIST, who will continue and talk about some of the work that NIST has been doing. Please.
Slide should appear somewhere. Oh. Next. Yep. Nope. Other direction, I got it. There we go. So Ken asked me to speak a bit about the things that we're doing to accelerate standardization and adoption of BGP security technologies. And Brian this morning mentioned the National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan, which actually in a different sub-item tasks NIST to accelerate development of standards and support adoption, in particular for BGP and IPv6. And beyond developing standards, focused on issues of commercialization and adoption. Wow, that didn't format well. So the thing I'll tell you is that we've been doing this for our internet infrastructure and critical network infrastructures for 30-some years. There's a broader Trustworthy Networks program that has pursued these kind of activities across BGP, DNS, V6, and a range of technologies. And then the thing that was wiped out by those icons is that we have a specific program that we call Robust Interdomain Routing that's been working with industry to address the BGP security problem. Going all the way back to 2003 or so, we were partners with DHS S&T when they first sort of provided some stimulus to the community to work on these issues. That program eventually went away or stopped or whatever, but our efforts haven't. I often talk about the roles of NIST. Some of them are well understood, but actually I always put up this life cycle picture that we work technology issues all the way from problem identification through research. A big focus on standardization. We are NIST, right, is actively contributing to protocol design and standard specifications. We try to build rapid prototypes before industry is interested in building rapid prototypes of protocols, do modeling and analysis, and eventually when standards are about to emerge or seem well-baked, we often produce deployment guidance, which is about the adoption, explaining the technology to people, explaining how to adopt it, and making recommendations for how to adopt it. We also do what most people would call sort of pilot or demonstration activities in the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, where we go and prove that you could deploy these solutions with commercial products. So we bring in vendors and collaborators to do demonstrations. Those activities produce practice guides, and eventually we get to where we specify requirements, and as close as we ever get to specifying true requirements, by producing things like additions to FISMA technical security controls. Some examples, you can go to the website of the Robust Interdomain Routing Project and seeing that we've been doing this kind of stuff through the creation of RPKI, ROV, BGPsec, but I put up some examples just related to ASPA. We worked with the IETF to produce a problem definition of that space. There's, which is published as an RFC. There's at least 4 active drafts that we are collaborating with industry about finishing ASPA validation drafts, verification drafts, and some additional schemes that pick up ASPA data and use it to build better route filters and the such. In terms of fostering commercialization and adoption, we have reference implementations of ASPA, maybe Rev 14 of the spec. It's currently 15, about to be 16. So we need to tweak our implementation also. And we produce tools for implementers. We have test tools that produce synthetic internet scale data sets as if ASPA was 100% deployed. So we can feed your router full ASPA data sets over the router, the RPKI to router protocol, and feed you BGP routes for various test suites to see if you implement ASPA like us. I won't call it a conformance test program. We have an implementation that we can run this stuff through. If you had an implementation that you could run these data sets through, we could compare them and see if we at least come to the same kind of conclusions. For operators and the community at large, we run things like the NIST RPKI monitor, which sort of takes a global perspective of deployment and tries to measure things about it. We're currently extending that to include ASPA data in that. We were tasked to collaborate. We've been collaborating for 30 years. I haven't updated this slide in 10 years or so. You can go to our website. I will say this. We understand that we neither build routers or operate networks. And so any proposal that we work on the IETF, we go find operators and router vendors to be partners, to make sure we're proposing something or working on something that's sensible. Some examples of guidance, which I think was really the subject matter here. In 2019, we published NIST 800-189. It always bugs me that NIST folk tend to talk about our documents in terms of numbers, but it has a title, Resilient Interdomain Traffic Exchange. And it's sort of broader than just BGP security, right? It's recommendations for the kinds of things, primarily an enterprise, although there are recommendations for ISPs in there, should worry about when they peer, right, when they connect to the internet. And there's a lot of explanation of technologies, including RPKI and route origin validation. But then there are specific security recommendations. There's actually 65 of them in that document published in 2019. Some examples of which are, here in this list, right? Is to enroll your resources in, the RIRs, in the registry systems, to have service level agreements. Our recommendations are most naturally towards government agencies, so that's an important comment to government agencies. There's recommendations about creating ROAs, using RPKI, recommendations for what enterprises should ask for from their ISPs. Now, I will say that this was published in 2019, and so, despite some indications in these discussions that things are moving slowly, in the last 4 or 5 years, things are moving rather quickly. And so there are many things, even about this recommendation, that we need to update to sort of catch up with where the state of technology and issues are today. I mentioned we go do these demonstration projects in the NCCOE. Also in 2019, we did one of these for basic RPKI, ROV technologies, had some number of commercial vendors there, had the prevailing implementations of the time, to resonate maybe with Catherine's points before. In 2019, this revealed tons of issues in the stability, the robustness of router implementations of ROV, their communications with RPKI validating caches. And so, experiments like this, and the validator we use is no longer supported or even fielded, right? And so these things have a limited shelf life, but they contribute to improving sort of the states of technology. And finally, sometimes we take the end game of all of these activities and roll them into security requirements, which primarily end up in what is typically known as the FISMA security controls. And there, actually in revision 5, we have recommendations that actually apply to BGP and actually all control information exchanged over an exterior boundary to your network. One of the things that we tend to do in these recommendations that I heard echoed in some of the ISP panels or comments is that we try to be technology agnostic, right? And so what these requirements say is you have to have a means by which you can authenticate and authorize the control information that's taken in, from external sources into your networks. And you have to publish information to enable other folks to authorize and authenticate your similar kinds of information. So we're trying to be technology agnostic about that and talk about the security requirement of what you need to protect at your border. Now, later on in this exact security control at the bottom, it says, go look at 889 for an example for how you could do this with RPKI and ROV, but the actual requirements are something that's a bit more technology agnostic. I think, oh, so what are we doing in the future? Working on USG RPKI enrollment, mainly the issue of, so what if the US government did en masse want to enroll in RPKI? What would that look like, right? There's, by our count, like 2,700 unique org IDs, historical allocation records in ARIN. Might we want to aggregate those up? That kind of thing. I mentioned the security guidance documents that came out in 2019. They actually need to be updated. Actually, to prepare for this talk, I actually went back and read the recommendations. So there are some things that have changed there. We're very interested in working in our tasking to collaborate with other agencies in how to drive deployment in USG networks. And we'll be collaborating with roadmaps and plans in that space. We're currently fairly involved with ASPA right now. We need to finish getting the verification spec kicked up through the IETF process and tweak our prototypes and traffic generators. And then there are many topics to continue to focus on. We're interested in the interaction of RPKI and ROV and common DDoS mitigation techniques. We've had some conversation with folks. I often say I know of 4 BGP-SEC implementations in the world, and we did 3 of them. So some folks, and we also authored some of the specs, have been talking to us about maybe less crypto-intensive approaches to path validation. And we have some work ongoing in the IETF that takes things like RPKI, ROV, and maybe ASPA and uses it to produce more accurate source address validation filters to address anti-spoofing and those kinds of issues. I think that's my last slide. Oh, there's some links.
Okay, and have to thank Doug actually twice because he did double duty here. Thanks, and very appreciate it. Our last segment is going to be a collection of content providers, and it's a different perspective in part because this is a crowd or group that really has a very large footprint across the internet. So it's not just within a given boundary or a given area and things. So we'll have 3 of the content providers. The one will be from Google, Amazon, and then Cloudflare. And our first speaker is Anis Sheikh from Google. And all of these individuals also will be doing this virtually. So they'll be doing it over Teams. And I think Anis is over in California, and the other 2 are in Europe. So crossing our fingers, this works well. But Anis, you're up. Excellent. Okay. Maybe on mute or not hearing you just yet.
Let's see, I just unmuted.
Okay, we got you now.
Okay. There's a bit of an echo. Hopefully that's not there in the room or on the webcast. Just wanted to start by
and I apologize, Anis, I apologize. I forgot to let you know or just remind you that since we have the slides over here, if you could just say next slide, and our staff will put the next slide in. Thanks a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm Anis Sheikh. I'm with the Google Global Networking team. I lead some of the work that we do on routing security here at Google. I just want to thank, first of all, Ken and it makes it a bit easier. Hopefully we'll not have too many glitches during this. So before jumping in, I just wanted to remark that the perspective from cloud and content providers is quite well aligned. So my remarks today are intended to be somewhat generic and mostly representative, and my colleagues can sort of correct me where I'm may be wrong. From the perspective of cloud service providers, from Google's perspective, we have done quite a bit of the implementation work on filtering as well as row registration, hijack monitoring, working with our peers. A lot of detail on our specific activities you can find in NANOG 86 talk that we gave, along with Frederick and Somesh Chaturmutta from Microsoft about what we're doing across cloud providers to improve routing security. So with that, we can jump into the slides and go through a bit of background. Next slide, please. So I'll start with a little bit of background about cloud service provider or CSP networks. You can think of these networks as effectively large global private WANs or wide area networks that do a couple of things. From these networks, we host a number of first-party services, applications, and content that are delivered by internet. From Google's perspective, this includes a number of services that have over 1 billion users, things that you've all heard of, like Google Search, Gmail, Google Photos, Google Maps, etc. So this is a large part of what's delivered from these large private WANs. And then in addition, we're also a cloud platform. So these cloud service provider networks, in addition to hosting first-party content, also host third-party services that are run by customers of the cloud platform. And this is true across platforms like GCP, Amazon, web services, as well as Azure and others. And as far as how we connect to the rest of the network, we look from the outside like stub networks with a few differences. First of all, we connect to a large number of different types of networks. Consumer networks, especially where we deliver a lot of these first-party services, these are where we have lots of individuals and households connecting to receive content and use applications. Then, of course, we connect to a large set of transit and connectivity providers. So most of the large tier 1 networks that carry traffic across the internet globally are peers of these networks. And then, in addition, further down the hierarchy, local and regional ISPs are also peers, as well as some enterprise networks that connect directly to CSP networks, for example, to use cloud services with direct connections. And then we have another set of connections, typically that I've labeled here as private connections. These are, to directly connect on-premises applications to the cloud. These are typically not routed on the public internet, but they're an important part of connectivity to end users. So as I said, these are a little bit unique from the normal way that we think about stub networks in the internet. First of all, they have a very large peering surface, right? So we have what's been characterized as independent reachability to a significant portion of the wider internet. And there's a nice measurement study from the ACM Internet Measurement Conference in 2020 that talks about this trend. These networks are also global in terms of their presence across private and public exchanges. So our POPs are sort of globally distributed, both in private connectivity facilities as well as public IXPs. And although there's a lot of similarity in these characteristics, there's also differences in how these networks are architected. So for example, differences in how some of the cloud networks rely on transit providers, for example, for reachability to the wider set of users. Next slide, please. So there's a few sets of routes that we need to worry about from a cloud service provider perspective to protect from BGP disruptions in the internet. One, as you would expect, are the routes that are used to reach users to deliver first-party services and content. So the way that these are typically protected is to enable route validation by other networks. So this means registering our routes in the RPKI, registering routes in the Internet Routing Registry's IRR system, maybe performing things like bilateral peer locks with large providers. This basically protects reachability from users back to the cloud. In addition, most of the cloud providers have widespread monitoring of the wider network to look for disruptions and basically try to take action proactively, before they do damage or before they're noticed by customers. So monitoring is a key part in visibility. I'll talk more about that later. The next sort of class of routes that we care about are those that are used, to reach back to users. So you can think of this as basically the return path to users of our content and services. So to protect these routes, essentially, we have to validate all the routes that we receive at our edge. So this requires filtering based on either RPKI origin validation that we heard a lot about today, as well as potentially IRR filtering, which has been used traditionally as another mechanism prior to RPKI. And in addition, we, as part of this, we want to encourage and facilitate the wider set of end user networks to register routes, because this enables a wider set of providers in the network to perform filtering and limit propagation of hijacks and leaks when they do occur. The next class is a little bit perhaps counterintuitive, but we do care about routes to third-party services, because we have a lot of cloud customers that we host that want to use, for example, other cloud platforms, content delivery networks, a variety of third-party services, and reachability to those services from our cloud platform is critical. So essentially, this requires the same set of techniques as the second category, which is to validate received routes that allow our users to reach those third-party services. And then finally, there's a set of services that most cloud platforms support, which allows users to bring their own routing space and host it from the cloud, so that their applications are reachable via their own IP space. And that requires us to advertise their routes on their behalf from our cloud platforms. So to do that, most cloud service providers will validate that those routes are in fact owned by those customers. And typically we use, as a proxy for that, the ability to create ROAs that authorize cloud providers to originate those routes. And then in addition to just validating ownership, there's also the important part of actually enabling validation and propagation of routes that we announce on behalf of customers by external networks. So making sure that propagation actually works as expected. So lots of classes of routes that we care about protecting. We often get asked about how we prioritize across these. There's common criteria, I think, that most cloud providers use as far as where we focus our attention, let's say, and prioritize. Although I think the aim in general is to apply these protections uniformly across all these different types of routes. But effectively, we attach some importance, of course, looking at routes weighted by their traffic volume. So obviously routes that carry a lot of traffic between our users or customers and the cloud network receive a lot of attention and maybe will get prioritized. And in addition, there's obviously going to be high value customers or critical services that we need to have reachable. For example, other cloud platforms from our cloud, and we make sure that those routes are also protected. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. So I wanted to say a little bit about how we work with our peer networks to help them improve the state of their routing data. Remember that we want to encourage all of these peers to register their routes so that their routes are protected in the wider internet. Both because we do filtering at our edge, but even more importantly, the large transit networks in the network, as they start enabling filtering, you only get protection when those routes are actually registered. So to help peers debug that, we have, for example, at Google, an ISP portal that's available to every network that peers with us. And it allows peers to view all of the routes that they announce to us, or at least our perspective of all the routes that they announce to us, as well as their disposition when it comes to validity in the RPKI and IRR systems. And it allows some drill down, as you can see, with these details that highlight specific kinds of problems and then how to also remediate them. So for example, we'll look for, in the case of IRR data, existence of route objects for each of those routes, existence of a correct AS set object that allows us to construct a view of which networks are allowed to announce those routes to us. And also we check for peering DB entries. Peering DB is a public platform for registering information about networks and their connectivity. So this is an example of a platform that we use to basically communicate with our peers and also help them in a somewhat automated way. And of course, they can always reach out to our NOC to get additional information about these routes as needed. Next slide, please. So I wanted to wrap up with a bit of a list of, let's call it a wish list of things that we'd like to see develop from a cloud service provider perspective in this area. One, as I mentioned already, we need more networks registering their routes in these public databases to basically enable filtering more widely. That includes RPKI. Now, as I think was mentioned a few times in the workshop today, RPKI ROA management is not what I would call simple. For one, any enterprise that has routes from multiple, allocated from multiple registries has the problem of dealing with different policies, different APIs if they're going to try to automate that process, different renewal periods, et cetera. So some standardization across regional internet registries would certainly help with this. And I think, we'll have another shot at trying to improve this process when we get to ASPA, as Doug and others discussed. I'd really like to see, or I think we would really like to see this simplified considerably when we do the next round of RPKI registrations for ASPA to protect paths. Another area that's important to pay some attention to is how we get more of the legacy IP space registered. Legacy IP space, of course, is space that's been allocated before the advent of regional registries that handle allocations today. These addresses or prefixes are held by government, academic institutions, some large ISPs. It's challenging to get this space registered because it requires a fair bit of cleanup and record keeping improvements. But this is something that we need to pay attention to get more of the IP space protected. And then finally, to enable filtering more in a more standards-based way, we do want to look for additional opportunities to establish common filtering standards. So for example, for IRR-based filtering, we always have this question about, well, which internet routing registries should we use to validate routes? And they vary quite a bit in their support for things like authentication, and we want to make sure that we're using the right set and that's commonly understood and well established in the industry. The next set is, from the filtering side, there's still some gaps in terms of major networks performing route validation. And although we've had really good progress, I think you heard from a number of the ISPs earlier today, with deploying RPKI origin validation, there are some gaps, especially when you look at it from a global perspective. And I think we would like to see more steps to encourage the remaining Tier 1 and transit networks to start filtering on all of their links. There's also been interest. We've received some queries, for example, from some of the smaller peers that we have, especially in developing parts of the world, about the possibility of having a public or managed filtering infrastructure. So, for example, hosting relying party software systems in a public infrastructure to enable those smaller networks to apply things like route validation. There are still a few remaining hurdles from a legal and process perspective that prevents some networks from registering their routes or from using RPKI to validate routes. We'd like to see those obviously removed. And then, encouraging the FCC and other agencies to engage with their counterpart agencies globally to further encourage filtering deployment on a global basis beyond the US and North America. The next set here is around visibility. I think I mentioned before that, visibility is critical to understand what's happening in the network, to identify where disruptions are occurring. And we really like to see expansion of this coverage for route monitoring and incident reporting. There are a number of public projects that are trying to do this work. The most well-known of these are route views right out of the University of Oregon, as well as RIS, the Routing Information Service from RIPE in Europe. There's a more recent project called GRIP from Georgia Tech, as well as a number of commercial services. One way to expand coverage is to really figure out how we can put more focus on supporting and expanding these public projects to enable more networks to get operational visibility into how BGP is operating globally, and to identify some of these disruptions and take action before they cause significant damage. And then finally, I think all the protections we've been talking about today, whether it's RPKI, origin validation, IRR filtering, et cetera, I would call these the basics, right? I think what we've seen more recently is that BGP-related threats are getting more sophisticated, and we need to get to the next set of protections and even identify new kinds of threats that are possible. So, for example, extending origin validation to include path validation. We heard a little bit about ASPA, and we talked a little bit about BGP-Sec earlier today. Today, we basically have, IRR AS sets, which define kind of these customer cones that allow us to do sort of a poor form of path validation and peer locks, where we do some basic AS path filtering, but we really need to get to something better. So finding ways to accelerate the deployment of this next set of protections, for example, to protect not just origin, but path as well, is going to be important. And then finally, there's a number of legacy processes that are still used widely in the industry that have been exploited recently in some malicious attacks that we've seen. So for example, things like LOAs, letters of authorization, that are used to secure connectivity with ISPs, those can be forged and have been used to basically fraudulently get connectivity and start advertising address space that's unauthorized. So there are definitely some legacy processes that we need to look at to improve. So this is not a full list, it's partial as it says at the top, but it's a few things that are top of mind, I think, for all cloud service providers to get to a better posture on routing security overall. Thanks again very much.
Okay, thank you, Anis. Our next speaker will be Frederick Korsbeck from Amazon.
Hi, thank you very much. Hope you can hear me just fine.
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, we can start a slideshow immediately.
We're trying to get there.
So good. All right, there we go. Looks like my slide. All right, my name is Frederick Korsbeck. I known as a BGP guy for Amazon Web Services, and I want to talk a little bit about what we are doing and what we think about the future. So we can go to the next slide immediately. So the AWS network is a fairly large network. We are today operating in 245 countries and territories, and we peer with basically any ISP that is interested in peering. We operate around 400 edge locations, and we manage hundreds of thousands of BGP sessions, and we turn up probably hundreds of new BGP sessions every day. So routing security is something that we had to think a lot about the last 10 years or so. Can go to the next slide. So a little bit on what we're doing now, and I wanted a little bit of difference here from Anish's slides. Like, first, I need to say that I essentially agree with everything that Anish had on his slides. The wish list is essentially the same things that we feel like. And we were working together for quite some time, all the big cloud service providers together with ISPs to, kind of figure out what we're going to do. So from an AWS perspective, we have a toolbox, or rather a new toolbox. We do have a lot of other things as well, but that is more, I would say, legacy technologies such as route filtering or RFC 1980 filtering and all that. Like that, obviously that is in place too, but this is kind of the new things. So max prefix filters is something I think that everyone should do. So essentially limit sessions to have a maximum amount of prefixes announced. This is to make sure that a small ISP suddenly can't become a big ISP without publishing it first. This has helped us many times, especially around mistakes, to make sure that, you know, if someone accidentally tried to announce to the whole internet, that it doesn't get reported. We have, since 3 years ago, RPKI ROAs on everything. And quite unique, I think, is that we force bring your own IP customers to create and keep the ROAs updated. And what this means is that you cannot enroll your own IP space onto AWS if you don't have a ROA present. When we launched this a couple of years ago, I know it created a bit of debate in the industry that we're relying on a technology that is perhaps new or unproven, but you know, so far we have not made a single exception for anyone, although many have asked, but we have never done it. So we have ROAS on everything, and we force all customers that comes in to also have it. About 3 years ago, I believe December 2020, we turned on origin validation on all external BGP sessions. So towards peers and tier ones and transients, whatever it is. And we have OV on, and we drop all invalid routes. We had a grace period of about 3 or 4 weeks before we flipped the switch to drop the invalids. And so far, I think we only had like 2 or 3 different people that actually reached out and wanted and wonder what happened, because they essentially lost connectivity to AWS globally. But the mistake was on their side, and they fixed it, and we haven't really looked back since. BGP weather, I think this is something that we have spent a lot of time on lately looking at. We do monitor BGP tables from a large set of available sources. We've been talking about a few of them earlier, like the open ones such as Risk Live, the commercial ones such as Curator or BGPmon, and we also look at our own data. Like we need to build like a data lake, if you want to use that word, on what is happening on the internet. And we need to be aware everywhere on the internet what is happening, because we're a global company, and anywhere in the world we can get an outage that could actually, you know, even if there's a route hijack in Indonesia, it could affect the US. So we need to look for these things everywhere. Automatic counter hijack system. I guess this is something that we haven't talked a lot about, but people have seen it. And whenever we see someone announce our IP space, we try to make a determination if we can essentially hijack it back. And the reason why we need to hijack it back, because we need to announce aggregates to the internet. We have quite a lot of IP space, and if we were to deaggregate it into the smallest common denominator, which is the /24 for IPv4, I don't think anyone would really appreciate that given the amount of IP addresses we have. So we always need to announce as big routes as possible to be nice towards other ISPs routers. But if someone tries to steal a subset of that prefix, we can hijack it back to us, basically. We're also trying to hijack ourselves. We are monitoring the posture of other ISPs by using our own network to send out probes of our own IP addresses and see if they propagate or not. And this is to try to figure out where and how threat actors can try to hijack us, or where mistakes could even happen. Quite recently, we've been enrolling delegated RPKI, both in the US and EU, and essentially the whole world to follow. We think we're alone at this, on this venture, at least among large internet companies. Smaller companies and scientific institutions have been doing this for quite some time. And what this means is that we are essentially moving all of our robots to our own infrastructure instead of the RIR more hosted model. We are happy to share war stories and you know, give insight on what this means. But we think this is an important step for a large internet company to make to essentially control your own fate. Another technology which we really like is PeerLock. I would say that PeerLock is a technology that is a stopgap solution for whatever comes next, right? So it is something that we will have to use before we have ASPA or even BGP-SEC. We are working with primarily large ISPs to get PeerLock in place. For the one that is not aware of the concept, is that We want to be statically programmed into ACE path lists from big service provider, which we could be connected with on 100 different places. And we essentially want them to not accept any traffic that looks like Amazon traffic or is Amazon traffic from anywhere except us, so that direct ports together with an ISP. We also do something called IRR counterintelligence. There's many speakers here today that has been speaking about how broken the IRR system is, and I'm probably the one that will be in the very forefront of saying that it is a broken system. So something I have been doing and some of my teammates have been doing is to look for anomalies in the IRR ecosystem. So essentially look for when someone is trying to create objects which may look like Amazon, or that is trying to be Amazon, or you know, even things such as you know, misspell the version of our company name. So we've been able to find quite a lot on that, which is quite scary when you start to open that box the first time. It's like, wow, there's someone that is, you know, trying to be us for maybe 2 years, right? And also, we've been pushing ISPs quite hard for years to improve this posture. And as many have said before, this is a team effort. It doesn't matter if we enable all of these things, if we're just alone doing it, then it would basically not do anything. I think one of the defining moments was, I believe we were up to like 2.5, 3 years ago. There is this famous graphs when basically all the big tier 1 providers enabled origin validation at the same time. And at the same time, another large internet company started registering all the routes. So when those two graphs met in the middle, it was quite a visible improvement to the whole our internet ecosystem. I wrote a blog post a year ago, so for more context, if you're interested in that, you can find it on the Amazon blog channel, and we can go to the next slide. So next slide, we want to speak about what is happening in the future. So two technologies, which has already been mentioned quite a lot here, is ASPA. We agree, we're on the ASPA bandwagon as well. We think that it is the next key technology for the internet in itself to get a fair chance of having path validation. We think, and I think most other people believe as well, that we are probably 3 years from a meaningful implementation. And this is assuming that everyone involved, everyone interested is actually working on it right now. So we are already working with customers, suppliers, vendors. We have both internal and external vendors, and essentially put this already in RFPs, RFQs, RFIs, just as we did with ROAs back in the days, right? So you will see this coming from us. If you're a vendor or a supplier or even a customer listening, then this is what's going to come, right? And the long-term bet is BGP-SEC. I guess no one in this room or no one in this standardization community actually know how the BGP-SEC implementation is going to look like, but we at least feel that it makes sense today for what I would say VIP BGP sessions, or very important peers, or peering sessions between two very able networks. So perhaps it could be between Amazon and I know that perhaps Tony on Comcast there is interested in this technology. Maybe that makes sense, right? Whereas it could be hard to do it with a small 10 people type of company. Like BGP-SEC is a fairly complex protocol. It's a fairly compute-heavy protocol. It is, yeah, we don't know yet, right? So it will most likely be between two very able companies that enables the first working BGP-SEC session. I also, just as everyone else has said, that we will never get 100% deployment of anything anywhere. And I think BGP-SEC will be a lot less than 100%. But if we can secure a couple of the highways of the internet, that at least makes for something. And then for the future problems that don't have a solution, and IRR, I think that's the first one. It is essentially a crowdsourced yellow pages of internet infrastructure. Today, there's a couple of big yellow pages, and there's a couple of very small ones that no one has really been paying attention to for many, many years. And those are the ones where threat actors is using today to inject bad data or preparing for larger scale attacks. And I think we as a community need to take a couple of really hard decisions on basically deprecating poorly maintained sources. Like the IRR ecosystem has essentially been working that if anyone wants to run an IRR source at some point during the last 30 years, you have been allowed to. And if you could prove that you had one or two objects that was important, then you got integrated into the whole global ecosystem around RADB and such. I see my slides has disappeared, at least in the team chat, but the last things I wanted to talk about was the lack of the lowest bar in the industry. So today there is certain ISPs that essentially has no routing security posture at all. We know who these are, but the problem is that also the threat actors know exactly who they are. And we have seen lately, like the last 12 to 18 months, that those are the ISPs that are being selected the most for malicious attacks. And these are the ones, I would certainly not mistakes, right? Like these are deliberate attacks by very skilled actors. I think there is a list circulating on the internet somewhere where these threat actors just share what they can do with every single ISP, and they select the ISP that makes the most sense for them. There's also really large international ISPs in this group that can essentially cause a cross-continental outage, and I think those are the most important ones to stop. Right? If we can make sure that these hijacks and these incidents doesn't traverse continents, is a pretty good start. And we come a very long way, because I do agree with everyone else here in this room that while it might feel that it is slow deployment, it's actually not that slow. Like we have a couple of really large companies on both the consumer side, on the ISP side, network side, cloud side, that has implemented this, and that has changed, that makes the needle to move right. Now we just need a lot of smaller changes to make the needle go faster, but still, we are on a good trajectory. We just need to figure out how to keep it like that. Manners, I'm a big supporter of Manners. We were part of, together with Anish and a couple of other companies here, forming the Manners of Cloud CDN working group. So obviously we believe it's a good concept, and we think that perhaps the Manners principle could function as a minimum baseline here. And that's basically what I have to say. I also, it's not here on the slides, but I do agree that the open source community needs all the love that they can get. We are trying to sponsor as many of those projects as possible, but clearly none of this is even remotely possible without the work that everyone in the open source community is currently doing. Because for us, and for most likely every other company, we are 100% reliant on open source software to make this thing run. And that was it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Tom Strix from Cloudflare. And also I want to remind everyone, after Tom speaks, we'll have a few minutes for some local questions here. We'll see how that goes. But Tom, you're up next there. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, folks. First of all, thank you all for the invite. I think we can immediately go to the slides. It's probably a bit easier. So let's see.
We're getting there.
It's a slow clicker, right? That's the issue. All right, I see my slides up. So yeah, I'm Tom Strix. I'm a principal network engineer at Cloudflare. Next slide, please. For those of you that don't know what Cloudflare is or kind of what we do, we're just like Amazon, just like Google, a global network with more than 300 cities part of our network. We connect with, just like Amazon, with pretty much every single network that wants to connect directly to Cloudflare. As of today, that is roughly 12,000 plus networks that are directly connected to Cloudflare. Basically every single major ISP, every single major cloud provider and major enterprise, which means that we're also within roughly 50 milliseconds of 95% of the world's internet connected population. Next slide, please. So as we have this pretty big footprint, we have a big responsibility as well in making sure that BGP security as a whole is up to snuff, right? Because as has been explained through the rest of the day, we're in a position now where the internet is critical for basically every single service that humanity relies on. So we need to make sure that it's secure from the bottom up. From our perspective, from Cloudflare's perspective, what that means for us is that we follow the Manners BCPs as indicated by Frederick. We're part of the Manners Cloud Working Group, which we're all signatures to. So that's kind of the first aspect. Second aspect, as with basically everyone else, I think, in this group at this point, we have RPKI ROAs for all of the Cloudflare-owned prefixes, and we do RPKI ROV on all external BGP sessions. As I'll explain in the next slide, it's very important, and has been explained previously, it's very important to make the distinction between RPKI ROAs and RPKI ROV. It's very important that networks do both, but it's more important for some networks than others. As far as community engagement, just like everyone here, we try to engage with all of the communities across the globe, not just the US. That's through engagement at RIPE, which is not just the RIR for Europe, it's also the community conference that happens bi-yearly. NANOG and APNIC are some of the other ones, which is Apricot, I think, for APNIC. We also have tooling contributions. There's two that I'd really like to call out. That's rpki.cloudflare.com, which shows us a very good overview of kind of the RPKI ecosystem as a whole, and radar.cloudflare.com, which shows a bit more of an accurate view of what we see to be the internet today. There's a specific subset, which is radar.cloudflare.com/routing that I'll show in 2 slides. So that's kind of what we do from a BGP security perspective. We have to acknowledge that we also have quite a few customers. We also have customers that do BYOIP and BYOASN, given that's a pretty popular feature. One of the things that we do is we enforce IRR entries for BYOIP. So we mandate that our customers cannot onboard onto our platform unless valid and accurate IRR entries exist. We highly encourage RPKI ROAs, so it's very different to, for example, Amazon here. We do not enforce RPKI ROAs today. I am pleased to say that that is definitely on our timeline, and hopefully we'll be able to say that by the end of this year, that will also be a requirement before any customer can onboard prefixes onto Cloudflare. We also provide automated hijack detection for our customers that do BYOIP. We leverage the platform Artemis for this. There is not really a particular reason why we're not using Grid. Artemis was first, and that's kind of why we ran with it. We also have the most expertise in-house when it comes to Artemis, so that's kind of why we stuck with it. And that's been a service that's been greatly appreciated by some of our customers. We also do customer education, right? So this is part of the community outreach, but it's also part of engaging with our customers and trying to explain, well, these requirements that we have are here for a reason, and try to explain, you know, these are the issues that we're encountering, and we're trying to make this better for you. It's also security as a service. By customers onboarding onto the Cloudflare platform and doing BYOIP onto the Cloudflare platform, it allows them to move their security posture away from having to own and manage it themselves and move it to Cloudflare, with the basic expectation that Cloudflare has a better expertise or more expertise at running this in a safe and reliable manner that mostly, you know, smaller operators or smaller enterprises may not have the expertise to. Next slide, please. If we kind of look at where we are today, it's, you know, it's like, it's sometimes really good to kind of look back and smell the roses. There's been some really good research coming out of Georgia Tech specifically in, you know, the evolution of both the ROAs being issued as well as ROV being enacted by ISPs. We kind of have the same look. If we look at the amount of ROAs signed specifically for ASNs that are registered in the US, you will see that about 31% of those are valids, and 67% of those are unknowns, as in no ROAs have been signed. One of the reasons for this is that some of the larger tier ones that are currently not doing or not emitting RPKI ROAs are actually US entities, or listed as US ASNs, which means that the US in this specific graph shows us kind of behind the rest of the world, given that the rest of the world, as previously mentioned, is around 40–45% of ROAs. But again, this is because, you know, there's a specific kind of exception there. If we look at ROV, which is the most important part, I guess, from a consumer perspective, and we see that the US is doing pretty well. Pretty much 50% of the users that are on the internet on a daily basis are covered by an ISP that is doing route origin validation. And that's really good news, right? It basically means that whenever there is a route hijack that RPKI ROV would prevent, 50% of customers in the United States would have no idea what the hell happened, right? They'd read the articles online and they'd go, yeah, that was fun for me. So that's great news. And I'm really, really pleased to kind of see those numbers. And I look forward to seeing these numbers grow over the years. Next slide, please. So some of this data is available on Cloudflare Radar, which is a publicly available internet weather station. It shows some really interesting statistics, both on a global point of view, but also per country or per ASN, if that's of interest. And we're really, really kind of excited and pleased that we're able to announce this, because we were able to announce this last Friday. So as far as timing is concerned, it is pretty damn solid. Next slide, please. So where are we going, right? Where are we going, both as Cloudflare as well as a community? So I kind of split this into two aspects. First of all, is the RPKI ecosystem has been mentioned multiple times. The RPKI ecosystem is a big driving force in enabling security for BGP. So what we're going to do as Cloudflare is enforce RPKI ROAs for BYOP, as previously mentioned. We're also actively engaging for ASPA, just as anyone else, trying to understand, okay, how does this work for Cloudflare? How does this work for our customers? How can we make sure that we can implement this without breaking everything else involved? And yeah, trying to do this in a fairly controlled rollout. We're going to be pushing our remaining suppliers for route origin validation. Given our very wide and large footprint, we also engage with multiple partners and suppliers that may or may not be enabling ROV. We are, as we have since basically 2018, 2019, we'll be pushing our suppliers that are currently not doing ROV to make sure that they implement ROV. One of the things that we're quite like, as an asking party, I guess, it's like the wish list, as mentioned by Frederick, is RTBH or traffic engineering prefixes. Currently, the RPKI ecosystem doesn't really allow for an easy method that allows operators to announce prefixes that are temporal in nature, both from a traffic engineering perspective, as in I have a link congesting, I want that link to uncongest, versus RTBH, as in I'm getting a DDoS attack and I need to DDoS attack to stop. Both of these, if they want to use RPKI, are heavily complex and quite complicated. I'm aware of some work being done within some operators to kind of make this work, but I think there's definitely still a lot of work to be done there. Outside of the RPKI ecosystem, we're going to keep expanding our footprint. The easiest solution to, or the easiest preventive measure outside of RPKI or outside of routing security from a route hijack or route leak perspective is just be connected to more networks. And that's exactly what we'll be doing. We'll keep growing the Cloudflare network to make sure that if or when a route hijack or a route leak happens, that most of the networks will never see it because they're directly connected to Cloudflare instead. I also want to make it clear that BGP security is not the only thing we need to invest in. We keep investing on work on other layers to make sure that the security is belts and braces, right? It's not just BGP security. It's also making sure that we have TLS for HTTP. It's making sure that we have quantum resistant cryptography. It's zero trust products, making sure that like it's not just trust on the IP that you're coming from. It is authentication, authorization, everything that else comes out that comes with it. We're also, just like Frederick mentioned, we're consistently monitoring and counteracting bad actors. That's both from engaging with other operators as well as active monitoring of what we see in the internet ecosystem as a whole. So that's kind of it from the Cloudflare perspective. Again, I want to thank you all for being here today and for the attention. Thank you.
And thank you, Tom, and I forgot to say thank you, Frederick, as well earlier. So we have a few minutes for some internal questions here, if any are coming up, or are we sort of exhausted? It's been a good day, but quite a lot of information. Tony.
Thanks for the presentations to all you three. Tom, and interested in the assertion about 50% of users, I think you said, in the U.S. are behind a network that's doing ROV. How are those users counted?
That's a very good question. I don't have a specific detail to that. That is mostly something for the research team. I'm more than happy to ask the research team on how specifically they've calculated that data, and be more than happy to come back to you with the explicit or the specifics on how they calculated the customer cone, I guess, from a pure customer perspective, not from an ASN perspective.
Okay, other questions? Perhaps? Okay, I think we can probably declare victory. But I appreciate everyone's time here, and especially the speakers that came up to talk and participate in the workshop. It was very good, very good to have, and we appreciate the information. Deb will be here to provide some final words.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone again. We've got a good group of stakeholders that are clearly interested in better securing the internet. Many of our private sector stakeholder partners have shared with us today things that they've done, measures that they have taken and are continuing to take to further secure the internet, and we appreciate those efforts. For our government partners, thank you for being really great partners to us, and we look forward to continued engagements with this group of stakeholders across the government and private sector as well, both as the FCC, but also as part of the larger intergovernmental body, largely led by ONCD. And we thank ODNI for bringing, and DOJ for bringing the threats forward. What I heard today is internet, and specifically BGP security, is important. Threats are real. They are complex as the internet is complex. There has been a lot of collaboration that has gone on. I think there was mention of CISRIC and Manners and a lot of acronyms that I don't exactly know what they stand for. Ken will make me smarter, but BTAG and NANOG, and I know that NIST has done a lot of work with security, and we're grateful for the work that they do. We all acknowledge there is more to be done, and I think that working with the stakeholder group going forward is going to help us further secure the internet. There are measures and measurements. I think that is something that NTCA mentioned to us that they're interested in understanding what's to be measured, how it's going to be measured, and I think that is key also. So again, I want to thank everyone. There will be further engagements that we'll announce going forward. Some of you asked about the slides. There is a site that is has been stood up for this workshop. It is pretty straightforward, fcc.gov/BGP-security-workshop. And you should be able to find the agenda, the PN, as well as we'll get the slides up there. And when the video is ready, we'll post it there also. So again, thanks to everyone. We are giving you back 17 minutes. Have a wonderful day.